Hey there, story lovers. This is Arcane Paradox, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. Fleur's Veela rage shattered 44 compulsion bonds on Harry at ball and French ministry declared war. Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1. The thing she saw. The Great Hall had been transformed into something out of a dream someone else was having. Ice sculptures caught the candlelight and threw it back in fractured blues and silvers. The ceiling, usually dependable in its reflection of the night sky, had been coaxed into something more festive, snowflakes drifting downward in slow, lazy spirals that vanished before they touched anyone's hair. The Weird Sisters played from a raised platform at the far end of the hall, and the bass line moved through the floor and up through the soles of your shoes and into your chest, where it settled in comfortably and refused to leave. Fleur Delacour was not enjoying herself. This was not unusual. Fleur frequently did not enjoy herself at Hogwarts. The school was drafty, the food was aggressively British, and the students stared at her with the blank, glassy expressions of people who had briefly forgotten how to operate their own faces. She had learned to ignore the staring. What she could not ignore, what she had never been able to ignore, was the low-frequency hum of her Veela heritage sitting beneath her skin like a second heartbeat, always present, always reading the room, cataloguing threats and intentions and the emotional weather of any crowd she walked through. Right now it was reading something wrong. She sat beside Roger Davies, who was saying something about Quidditch. She knew it was about Quidditch because his mouth was moving and she'd caught the word, Crumb, twice, and everything at this school eventually circled back to Quidditch or Victor Crumb or both. She made the appropriate sounds. She smiled at the appropriate intervals. Her Veela instincts were not even slightly focused on Roger Davies. They were focused on Harry Potter. He was across the hall, sitting beside Parvati Patil, who was looking at the dance floor with the specific expression of someone who had expected more from the evening and was recalibrating in real time. Harry was not looking at the dance floor. Harry was staring at the table in front of him with the fixed, slightly vacant expression of someone enduring rather than experiencing. Fleur had noticed Harry Potter before tonight. It was impossible not to. He was a 14-year-old boy who had somehow entered a tournament designed for adults, whose name had come out of a goblet that was supposedly impossible to fool, and who walked around Hogwarts with the baffled, slightly hunted look of someone who couldn't quite work out why everything kept happening to him specifically. She had found him mildly interesting. A curiosity. But sitting at her table with the music moving through the floor and the ice sculptures throwing cold light across the room, her Veela senses were doing something they had never quite done before. They were pulling hard toward Harry Potter. Not with attraction, she would examine that distinction more carefully later, but with something older and more urgent. The way a compass needle doesn't choose to point north. It just does. She let her attention drift across the hall properly for the first time, past Roger's shoulder, and looked at Harry Potter with her Veela senses fully open. And then she went absolutely still. It took her a moment to understand what she was seeing, because she had never seen anything like it. Around Harry Potter, invisible to normal sight but blazing to her perception like ink on white paper, were threads. Dozens of them. Thin, silvery gold constructs woven so densely and so artfully that they had the appearance of something organic, like they'd grown there, like they'd always been there, like they were supposed to be there. They weren't supposed to be there. She knew compulsion work. Her grandmother, who was 3/4 Veela and had no patience for diplomatic softness, had taught her to recognize the smell of it the way a dog recognizes the smell of something dead in long grass. You learned because Veela were targets. Beautiful women who made men stupid were targets for all manner of magical coercion, and you learned to see it or you learned it the hard way. What was on Harry Potter was not the clumsy, short-duration compulsion work of a jealous rival or an opportunistic attacker. This was architecture. Layer upon layer of it, some threads old and faded to near transparency, some newer and bright, all of them interwoven with the kind of patience and skill that made her stomach turn. She counted without meaning to, the way you count without meaning to when you see something that disturbs you and your mind needs the order of numbers to cope. The threads responded to her attention by seeming to clarify, and she counted them in clusters, there, a group of 4 that all anchored near the same emotional center, there, a tight knot of 7 that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, there, 44. 44 compulsion bonds on a 14-year-old boy. Roger Davies said something. She didn't hear it. The first thing she felt was a cold, specific horror, the kind that doesn't announce itself loudly but settles into the base of your spine like something taking up residence. Someone had done this deliberately. Repeatedly. Over years, by the look of the fated ones. Someone had sat down, presumably more than once, and crafted bonds designed to look organic, to feel like natural emotion, to make Harry Potter feel like his own thoughts were his own thoughts when they were anything but. The second thing she felt was rage. She would think about this later. She would spend a great deal of time thinking about this later, the speed at which it moved through her, the absolute absence of any moment where she considered not acting. Veela protective rage was not something you decided to feel. It was something that happened to you, like a lightning strike happened to a tree. The tree didn't choose to split. The tree just split. The magic came up through her like a tide. Fleur. Roger Davies said, and his voice sounded very far away. Are you? She stood up. Later, people would describe what happened next in a dozen different ways, depending on where they'd been sitting and what they'd been paying attention to. Lavender Brown would tell anyone who listened that there had been a sound like a harp string breaking, except a harp string the size of the castle. Cedric Diggory, who had been closer than most, would say it had felt like the moment before a thunderstorm when the air pressure drops and your ears go strange. Victor Crumb, who had more experience with high-level magic than most people in the room, would say only that he had felt the discharge from 30 feet away and immediately recognized it as something well outside the normal parameters of human magic. What Fleur experienced was simpler and more terrible. She felt her Veela nature rise completely, not the partial surfacing she normally kept it leashed to, not the controlled warmth she deployed socially, but all of it, the full ancient inheritance of something that was never entirely human. The air around her heated. The ice sculptures within 10 feet developed hairline cracks. Her hair rose from her shoulders as if pulled by invisible hands, and the light, there was a light, golden white and savage, and then she pushed. Not toward anything. Not with any spell or structure. Just the rage, focused by instinct on the thing that had caused it, projected outward in a wave that she had no training for because nobody had ever needed to train for this. The Veela elders had stories about it. They called it La Rupture Protectrice, the protective break. It was supposed to be a myth. Across the hall, Harry Potter made a sound. It was not dramatic. That was the thing she would remember. She had expected something cinematic, she hadn't expected it, she hadn't been expecting anything, but later she would think that she might have expected something big. An explosion. A shout. What happened was that Harry Potter, sitting beside Parvati Patil, simply made a small, broken sound, and then his hands came up to either side of his head, and then his magic erupted. The word erupted was not hyperbole. The table in front of him cracked down the center. The plates shattered. The 2 ice sculptures nearest to him didn't crack, they exploded, cleanly, into showers of fragments that caught the light and hung in the air for a breath before raining down on the tables around him. The students nearest him threw themselves backward. Parvati screamed. The weird sisters stopped playing, not all at once, but in a ragged cascade as each musician registered that something had gone very wrong. And the 44 threads, they snapped. Not one at a time. All of them, simultaneously, in the instant Harry's magic burst outward. Fleur saw them go, saw the silver-gold constructs dissolve into nothing like frost in direct sunlight, and the sound they made as they broke was the sound Lavender had described, a harp string, except a harp string the size of something ancient and enormous, and for one horrible moment the sound was so resonant that it was physical. She was moving through the crowd without deciding to move. People were standing up. There was the specific noise of a hall full of alarmed teenagers, which was loud and not coherent and moved in waves as the people closest to the epicenter scrambled back and the people farther away stood on their chairs to see. Fleur moved through the scrambling like water through gaps, and she was aware, distantly, in the part of her brain that was still operational, that her Veela aura was still fully active and people were getting out of her way without entirely understanding why. Harry was on the floor. Not collapsed dramatically. He'd pushed his chair back, and he was crouching, both hands flat on the stone floor, his head down, and his magic was still moving. She could feel it even from 5 feet away, an enormous invisible pressure, the kind that made your teeth ache. It wasn't attacking anything. It was more like something contained for a very long time finding that the container was gone, moving outward in all directions without any particular direction, looking for its own edges. She crouched in front of him. Potter. She kept her voice low and even, because she was still about 30% Veela aura and the rest of her was working very hard to pull it back in. Look up. He looked up. She had expected disorientation. She had expected the stunned, glassy look of someone whose mental architecture had just been demolished. What she got instead was intensity. His eyes were very green, she noticed irrelevantly, and they were absolutely, completely present. Like someone who had been watching the world through frosted glass their entire life and the glass had just been removed. "What did you do?" he said. His voice was very calm. Dangerously calm, she thought, and then revised, not dangerous, just, stripped of the usual social padding. He wasn't being rude. He was asking a real question with real urgency and he had no time for anything other than the actual question. "Later," she said. "Right now I need you to breathe and pull your magic in before you bring the ceiling down." He looked at the ceiling, apparently considering the possibility seriously. Then he looked back at her. "I can feel it," he said. "My magic. I could always feel it a bit, before. Now it's very loud. I know." She extended her hand, palm up, between them. "Hold on to something and pull inward. Like a held breath." He looked at her hand. She watched him make the decision, which took about 2 seconds. He was quick, she noted, once he wasn't being steered, and then he took it. The contact was like grabbing a live wire. Not painful. Just, vast. His magic registered her as safe and non-threatening and oriented itself accordingly, and the pressure in the room dropped so sharply that 3 people nearby actually wobbled. "Good," she said. "Good," he agreed. And then, because apparently clarity came quickly when you had spent 14 years processing things through a filter and the filter was suddenly gone, there were things on me. Compulsions. I could feel them breaking. I could feel where they'd been. Yes. How many? She held his gaze. 44. He didn't flinch. He filed it away, and she watched him do it, a very controlled, very deliberate processing, the kind she associated with people who'd learned early that emotional reactions got punished. "Who?" "I don't know," she said. "Not yet." He nodded. His magic was still now, settled back within him, but she could feel it against her palm like a banked furnace. Whatever had been suppressing it for years had evaporated, and what was left was enormous. Not uncontrolled. Just, enormous. Professor Dumbledore arrived. He moved through the crowd with the particular authority of a man who had been managing crises for longer than most people had been alive, and he arrived at their position with his robes slightly disordered and his expression arranged into something she could only describe as calibrated concern. Behind him came Professors McGonagall and Snape, and behind them, half the faculty, all of them wearing variations on the expression of people who were trying to appear calm while experiencing something close to the opposite. "Harry," Dumbledore said, his voice warm and carrying and perfectly pitched to soothe. "My boy, are you?" "I'm fine, Professor." Harry stood up. He was still holding Fleur's hand, and he didn't let go, which she noted. He looked at Dumbledore with those newly clear green eyes, and there was something in his expression that she imagined had never been there before, not hostility, not exactly, but a total absence of the reflexive deference that she'd observed in him previously. He was evaluating Dumbledore, she realized. Looking at him the way you look at something you'd assumed was one thing and are now reconsidering. Dumbledore's eyes moved to their joined hands, and something shifted very briefly behind his half-moon spectacles. He smiled. I see our Beauxbatons champion has been looking after you. Mademoiselle Delacour, are you all right? I am well, Fleur said pleasantly, because she had been dealing with people who asked the wrong questions in the wrong tone since she was 12. She smiled back. She made it entirely warm and gave nothing away. What happened? McGonagall asked. She was looking at the cracked table, the shattered plates, the scattered ice fragments, with the expression of someone cataloging damage in real time. There was some kind of magical discharge. I apologize for the table, Harry said. I don't think I'll be able to explain it properly tonight. McGonagall stared at him. Fleur suspected Harry Potter did not normally say things like that to Professor McGonagall. That's quite all right, Dumbledore said, and his voice was still warm, still perfectly calibrated, but his eyes were doing something more complicated. He extended a hand toward Harry's shoulder in the practiced gesture of someone who had been offering reassuring contact for decades. Perhaps we should move somewhere quieter, and Harry moved his shoulder slightly to the left. Not sharply. Not rudely. The gesture was so natural it almost looked accidental. Dumbledore's hand settled on air. I think I'd like some air, Harry said. Mademoiselle Delacour, would you mind? Not at all, Fleur said. They walked away from the faculty, through the crowd of students who parted around them with the slightly dreamy compliance of people still processing Fleur's residual aura, and out through the side entrance into the cold corridor. Behind them, she heard Dumbledore say something quiet to Snape. She caught only 3 words, but they were sufficient. How is this possible? The corridor was cold and dark after the blazing warmth of the great hall, and for a moment they just stood in it, letting the noise recede. Somewhere in the distance, the Weird Sisters had started playing again, because the music of a party was not something you stop for long even after a genuine magical catastrophe. Harry let go of her hand. He looked at it for a moment, then looked at her. I felt that, when you, whatever you did. He wasn't accusatory. He was, again, just asking. It came from you. Toward me. And then everything. He gestured vaguely. My Veela nature broke the bonds, she said. Not a lie, and not a full truth, and she was already deciding how much to tell him and in what order. I saw them first. The compulsion work. You can see compulsions. Veela can sense them. We are. She considered the word. Targeted often. My grandmother taught me to look. I have never seen anything like what was on you. She held his gaze. Not in scale. Not in craft. 44 separate constructs, many of them very old. He was quiet for a moment. The torches in the corridor threw warm, unsteady light across his face, and she watched him think. He didn't think the way most boys she knew thought, noisily, with their face doing all the work. He went still and internal, and when he came back out he had answers. The forgiveness one, he said. That was one of them. I can feel where it was. There was something that, whenever I thought about Dumbledore, or Ron's family, or certain other people, there was this. He struggled for the word. Warmth. But it was installed. It was put there. He said this last without horror, which she found more disturbing than horror would have been. He said it like someone identifying the correct name for something they'd suspected for a long time. Yes. And there were ones for my magic. I could always feel my magic, like I said. It was always, muffled. Like hearing music through a wall. He put his hand out flat in the air, palm down. Nothing visible happened. Then the torches in the corridor blazed up simultaneously, 3 times their previous height, and died back down. He lowered his hand with an expression that was very close to satisfaction. That's what it's supposed to feel like. Fleur said nothing for a moment. Then, Potter. Some of those bonds were very old. How old? Some of them, I think from before Hogwarts. Before you would have had any magic to suppress. He looked at her. She watched him do the arithmetic. So someone started when I was a child, he said. Flatly. Yes. He nodded. And then he did something she hadn't expected, which was to laugh, a single, short, slightly disbelieving sound. Of course they did, he said. Of course they did. He looked up at the ceiling of the corridor, breathing slowly. I need to think about this. Properly. Without, he caught himself. Without the filters, she supplied. Right. He looked at her sideways. Why did you do it? You didn't have to. Most people can't even see it. She considered lying. Or at least softening. It would have been easy. She was very good at saying things that were true but partial, and she had spent years deploying that skill in rooms full of people who wanted things from her. But he'd just had 44 compulsions stripped from his mind, and he was standing in a cold corridor asking her a real question with his real face. My Veela nature didn't give me a choice, she said. It responded before I decided. Seeing that, what was on you, it caused a protective reaction. I lost control of it, for a moment. She paused. I am not sorry. I didn't think you were, he said. Something in his voice was almost amused. He looked at her, really looked at her, in the way that most people didn't quite manage, because most people got tangled in her appearance before they got to actually looking. He wasn't tangled. He was just looking, steady and clear. Thank you. She didn't say to Rain, it wasn't nothing. She said, you're welcome. They stood in the corridor for another moment, the music from the ball a distant pulse. The person who did this, he said. They'll know it's undone. Probably. And they'll want to know how. And who. He tilted his head slightly. That puts you in an interesting position. She lifted an eyebrow. You're worried about my position. I'm noting it, he said, and there was something under his voice that hadn't been there 2 hours ago, a steadiness and a specificity. You just dismantled something someone spent years building. They won't be happy. I am Fleur Delacour, she said, and she said it the way her grandmother had taught her to say it, not as arrogance, but as a simple statement of fact, the way you'd say I am armed or I know what I'm doing. They are welcome to be unhappy. He smiled. Not the slightly apologetic, slightly bewildered smile she'd observed on him before, when people were being unpleasant and he was navigating it with more patience than they deserved. This was something else, genuine and sharp and a little surprised, like he hadn't expected to find something worth smiling about this evening. Right, he said. Then I think we both have things to figure out. We do. She straightened, shook her hair back over her shoulders, a gesture that was partly habit and partly the last of her Veela aura settling back into its usual leash. But not tonight. Tonight your magic has just had an enormous shock and you should sleep before you try to do anything with it. You're right. He didn't argue, which she respected. He pushed off the wall and turned toward the staircase that led up to the Gryffindor Tower. Then he stopped. Delacour. Fleur, she said automatically. He absorbed this. Fleur. Tomorrow morning. Can you be at the library at 9? I can. Good. He paused. Bring everything you know about compulsion bonds. I want to understand what was done to me. I'll bring my grandmother's letters, she said. She wrote them in French, but I'll translate. I'll manage, he said. And then, with the specificity of someone who had just become sharply aware of their own competence, I read French. She stared at him. You read French. Hermione thought it might be useful. Given the tournament. He actually did look slightly sheepish about this one. I've been studying since September. She found herself deciding, in that moment, that Harry Potter was genuinely interesting. Not in the way the boy who lived narrative made him interesting, which was the wrong kind of interesting, the curiosity about a spectacle kind. But the person standing in front of her, stripped of 44 layers of magical interference, was sharp and adaptable and honest in a way that was uncomfortably rare. 9 o'clock, she said. Don't be late. I'm never late, he said, which was almost certainly not true for Hogwarts Harry Potter and was probably completely true for the actual one. He went up the stairs. She watched him go, and then stood in the cold corridor for a moment with her Veela senses very slowly quieting down from the blaze of the last 20 minutes. She had broken 44 compulsion bonds on a Triwizard champion. On British soil. In a British school. During a tournament that France was participating in under diplomatic good faith. She needed to write to her mother. Tonight. The Beauxbatons carriage was warm and smelled of sandalwood and good beeswax candles, and it sat on the grounds of Hogwarts like an elegant rebuke to the castle it was parked beside. Fleur sat at the writing desk in her cabin, wrapped in a robe over her ball gown because she hadn't paused to change, and wrote by wand light with the neat, rapid hand her mother had drilled into her from the age of 7. Maman, I need you to contact Grandmere Solange and ask her what she knows about detection of compulsion networks on human magical subjects. I also need you to contact whoever we know at the ministry who handles curse-breaking and magical coercion law. I am not yet prepared to explain fully in a letter, but I am asking you to trust that this is urgent and that I am not in danger. I have, this evening, encountered a compulsion network of a scale and craft I have never seen or heard described outside of historical context. The subject is a person under French tournament protection by virtue of his status as champion. The network has been dismantled. The subject is unharmed. The implications are significant. Please move quickly. I will write more tomorrow when I know more. With love and also with some urgency, Fleur. She sealed it with wax and pressed her ring into it, which was the Delacour family seal and which meant, in their private shorthand, this is not an optional request. Then she wrote a second letter, shorter, to her grandmother directly. Grandmere, your stories about La Rupture Protectrice were not myths. I need to know everything you didn't put in the stories. Fleur. She sent both owls out into the night from the carriage window, watched them become small dark shapes against the moon, and then sat back in her chair and let the full weight of the evening settle around her. In the castle above her, the Yule Ball was still going. She could hear the bass line, distantly, through 2 sets of walls. People were dancing and drinking and being romantic in corners, because a party in a castle full of teenagers was not something that stopped for one table of shattered plates and one moment of raw magical discharge. But Fleur knew, with the certainty of someone whose grandmother had spent 60 years navigating magical politics across 3 countries, that what had happened tonight was not an incident that would be allowed to be quietly managed. Not by Dumbledore's soothing presence and his calibrated smiles. Not by the British ministry's famous preference for resolving things internally and making the minimum possible noise about it. Someone had put 44 compulsion bonds on a 14-year-old boy. Someone with patience, skill, and access, extended, repeated access to that boy over years. And that boy was now competing in a tournament on French terms, under French magical jurisdiction insofar as the tournament extended that jurisdiction, and Fleur had been trained by a grandmother who had no patience for diplomatic softness. The French ministry would hear about this. She would make sure of it. She blew out her wand light and lay down without changing, staring at the ceiling of the carriage, listening to the distant heartbeat of the party in the castle. She thought about Harry Potter's eyes when he'd looked up at her from the floor, the green of them, the sudden absolute clarity. The way he'd asked how many and absorbed the answer with no drama. She thought about what those 44 bonds had felt like from the outside. 44 separate decisions to reach into a child's mind and adjust him, the way you'd adjust a machine. The patience of it. The confidence of whoever had done it, the confidence that they would never be caught, because who would think to look? Who would sit down at the Yule Ball with Veela senses fully open and look at Harry Potter and see him? Her grandmother's voice in her memory, dry and precise. The advantage of being perceived as a beautiful distraction is that no one considers you a threat until it is far too late. She closed her eyes. Somewhere above her, in the Gryffindor Tower, Harry Potter was lying awake in the dark, feeling the full unconstrained weight of his own magic for the first time, thinking hard and quick and clear about a list of 44 things. She thought, whoever did this had better be afraid. Then she thought, they're not. Not yet. Then she thought, they will be. In the Great Hall, the Yule Ball wound down the way all school dances wound down, in stages, reluctantly, with the lights coming up too bright and the music stopping in the middle of a song and everyone suddenly aware of how tired they were. Albus Dumbledore did not participate in the wind down. He had moved to his office 40 minutes after Harry Potter had walked out of the Great Hall, and he sat now behind his desk with the fire burning low and his hands folded in front of him, and he was thinking. The instruments on the shelves around him were quiet. They had been very briefly not quiet, several of them had spun or chimed or flickered at the moment of the discharge in the Great Hall, registering a magical event large enough to reach them through 3 floors of stone. He had since calibrated them back to stillness with a few efficient spells, but the readings they had taken in those seconds were stored, and he would examine them properly tomorrow. What he knew tonight was this: something had happened to his careful work. The delicate architecture he had built over years, with patience and genuine love and absolute certainty that it was necessary, the guidance structures, the loyalty bindings, the ambition dampeners, the trust constructs, all of it had been swept away in a single second by Fleur Delacour's inexplicable Veela response. He had not planned for Fleur Delacour. He sat with this fact, turned it over, examined it. He was not a man who experienced panic. He was a man who had lived long enough that almost every difficult thing was, in some sense, manageable if you moved with sufficient deliberateness. Harry would be confused and disoriented. He would need guidance, new guidance, carefully calibrated to the current reality. That could be done. But the French girl was a complication. She had seen the bonds clearly enough to be enraged by them. She had the specific Veela skill set that made compulsion work visible, which was rare and which he had not accounted for because the Veela who possessed it were not, typically, sent to compete in Triwizard Tournaments. He would need to understand what she intended to do with what she'd seen. Whether she'd told anyone. Whether. There was a sharp sound from behind the portrait of Everard, and Dumbledore turned his head. She sent 2 owls, said the portrait. Watched them leave from the carriage window. French birds. Fast ones. Dumbledore looked at the fire for a long moment. Thank you, Everard, he said. His voice was perfectly calm. It was always perfectly calm. It was perfectly calm all the way down to whatever was underneath it, which was not calm at all, but which Albus Dumbledore had been hiding from himself for so long that he had entirely lost track of where it was. He reached for a piece of parchment and began to write. He would need to be careful. More careful than usual. Because Harry was awake now, truly, fully, frighteningly awake, and the French girl had already proven herself to be very good at seeing things that were not meant to be seen. He sealed the letter. He did not send it immediately. He sat with it in his hands for a moment, in the dying firelight, in the silence of an office full of sleeping portraits and quiet instruments. He was a good man. He believed this sincerely. He had always believed this sincerely. Every choice he had been made in the service of a greater good, a good that Harry was central to, a good that required Harry to be a certain kind of person and not some other kind. The bonds had not been cruel. They had been guidance. Scaffolding. Necessary architecture for an impossible life. He still believed this. But somewhere in the castle, Harry Potter was lying in the dark with 44 empty spaces where 40 years of careful work used to be, feeling his own magic like a flood that had just had its dam removed. And Albus Dumbledore was, for the first time in a very long time, genuinely uncertain what the morning would bring. Chapter 2, What the Silence Sounds Like. Harry didn't sleep. This was not unusual. He'd had years of poor sleep, nightmares, the occasional Voldemort-adjacent vision that left him sitting up in the dark at 3 in the morning staring at the canopy of his 4-poster. But this was different. This was the opposite of nightmares. He lay in the dark and felt his own mind with the focused attention of someone exploring a room they'd lived in for years and discovering, for the first time, that half the furniture wasn't theirs. The other boys were asleep. Ron was snoring with the specific rhythm that Harry had catalogued and learned to sleep through over 3 years. Neville made small, anxious sounds at intervals. Dean and Seamus were silent. The dormitory was dark and warm and completely ordinary, and Harry lay in it and quietly took himself apart. He started with the anger. Not manufactured anger, he wasn't manufacturing anything. He was identifying what was real. The anger was real. It sat in his chest like a coal, and it was the clean, specific anger of someone who has understood something clearly for the first time and doesn't need to dress it up or make it more palatable than it is. 44 things had been living in his head. Some of them for years. Some of them he kept coming back to what Fleur had said and he kept doing the same arithmetic and arriving at the same answer, some of them since before Hogwarts. Since before he'd had enough magic to suppress. Someone had started on him when he was a child living in a cupboard under the stairs. He sat with this. He didn't push it away or soften it or wrap it in the kind of forgiving warmth that he realized now had always been slightly too available, slightly too automatic whenever he thought about the people who should have protected him. That warmth was gone. He didn't miss it. What he had instead was clarity, which was sharper and more honest and, he was discovering, considerably more useful. The other thing he did was take stock of his magic. It was like coming up from underwater and taking a real breath for the first time. He'd always had strong magic, he'd known that, in the abstract way you know things when they've been slightly filtered. But abstract knowledge and actual experience were different things, and his magic, now unfiltered, was not what he'd thought it was. It pressed against him from the inside with the easy, natural pressure of something that had always been this size but had been living in too small a space. Not dangerous. Just real. Just his. He extended it experimentally, the way you'd flex a muscle you'd been told was injured. The curtains at the end of his four-poster shifted. The candle stub on his bedside table lit without him looking at it. He put it out immediately so he wouldn't wake Ron, but not before he'd noted the ease of it, no wand, no verbal component, just intention translated directly into result. He hadn't known he could do that. He'd suspected, vaguely, but the suspicion had always dissolved before he could examine it properly, which he now understood was not coincidence. He thought about Dumbledore. He gave himself permission to really think about Dumbledore, without the installed warmth smoothing the edges. He thought about every conversation, every choice, every moment where the old man had pointed him in a direction and he'd gone without asking why. He thought about the mirror of Erist, and it shows us nothing more or less than the deepest, most desperate desire of our hearts. Was that his desire? Had it been? Or had his desires been so thoroughly managed by that point that what the mirror showed him was the desire that had been installed in him and not the one he actually had? He thought about the first-year confidence that everything Dumbledore did was right. The third-year compliance. The fourth year, the goblet of fire. He stopped on this one. His name had come out of the goblet of fire. He'd spent 2 months assuming it was someone trying to kill him, which was a reasonable assumption given his history, and he'd also spent 2 months carrying a low-level anxiety about it that he'd never quite been able to pin down, a sense that he was missing something, that the picture had gaps, that the accepted narrative had the quality of something assembled rather than something that had grown naturally from events. Without the filters, the gaps were suddenly obvious. Someone had put his name in the goblet. The same someone, he was becoming increasingly certain, who had put 44 compulsion bonds on him over the course of his life had also arranged for him to be in this tournament. He didn't have proof. He didn't need proof tonight. Tonight he needed to understand the shape of it, and the shape of it was, he had been here before in a context that was much larger than a rival wanting him dead. There was a plan. There had always been a plan, and he had been the center of it, and the bonds had been part of keeping him compliant and directed while the plan ran. He wasn't angry about the plan specifically. He was angry about the 44 things in his head. The plan he could deal with. The violation was the 44. He got up just before 6. The common room was empty, grey light coming in through the windows, the fire reduced to embers. He sat in the chair closest to the hearth and pulled his knees up and thought for another hour, and this time he let himself be systematic. He went through every relationship he could think of and asked, what is actually here, now that the filters are off? Some things held. His friendship with Hermione, yes, that was real, he could feel the realness of it, the way genuine affection felt different from the installed variety. Some things were more complicated. Some things were, when he looked at them squarely, mostly empty. He thought about the Dursleys. He thought about how he'd always accepted the Dursleys, not happily, not with gratitude, but with a kind of dull resignation that had never quite sharpened into the actual appropriate response, which was fury. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs. He thought about 10 years of systematic cruelty and how he had never once, in all that time, done the things he was now fairly certain his unfiltered magic was entirely capable of. He'd always thought that was self-control. He was revising that interpretation. At 7 he went to the bathroom, showered, changed, and felt his magic run through him warm and easy while the water ran, lighting the bathroom mirror briefly when he glanced at it, because the magic was present now and responsive in the way that breathing was responsive, not effortful, just happening. He was at the library at 8:45. Fleur arrived at exactly 9, wearing her Beauxbatons uniform and carrying a leather satchel that clinked very faintly with glass when she moved. She pushed through the library door and found him already at a table in the back corner, well away from Madame Pance's usual patrol routes, with 2 cups of tea from the kitchen, Dobby, who had been delighted to help and who had not seemed remotely surprised by the early request. She looked at the tea. Then at him. You've been awake all night. Yes. He pushed 1 cup toward her. Is that a problem? She sat down across from him and studied his face with the direct, measuring Veela attention that he was now fairly sure was something more than normal perception. How do you feel? I feel like myself, he said. That's the strange part. I feel exactly like myself, except I also know that yesterday I didn't. She nodded. She opened the satchel and began setting things on the table, a bundle of letters in distinctive pale blue envelopes, a slim leather-bound notebook that looked old enough to be concerning, and 3 small glass vials containing what appeared to be silvery liquid. Those are memories, she said, noticing his look. My grandmother's. She extracted them last year when she thought she was dying. She was not, in fact, dying, she had a mild cursed ink poisoning which the healers sorted out, but she'd already extracted the memories and sent them to me, so. She set them in a row. They are primarily about Veela history and compulsion detection. Some of them may be relevant. What's in the notebook? A survey of compulsion magic written in 1847 by a French cursebreaker who specialized in politically motivated magical coercion. She was investigating something unrelated, a network set up by a minister who wanted to manage his opponents, but her methodology is detailed. She paused. The network she documented had 9 bonds. She described it as the most complex case she had encountered in 30 years of practice. Harry was quiet for a moment. 44, he said. 44. She met his eyes. What I did last night, the rupture, it destroyed the bonds. It did not leave records of what they were or who placed them. That's a problem. To prove what was done to you, we need to reconstruct. Reconstruct how? The anchors, she said. She opened the notebook and turned it to a diagram, a schematic of a human figure with lines radiating from specific points on the body, like a magical anatomy illustration. When a compulsion bond is removed, the anchor points remain on the subject for days, sometimes weeks. They're like bruises in the magical body. If we can document them, all 44, and someone with the right skills reads them, they can determine approximate age, probable structure, and sometimes the magical signature of who placed them. Harry looked at the diagram. Then back at her. You've been thinking about this since last night. I've been thinking about this since last night, she agreed, without apology. So have I. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of parchment, covered in his handwriting, dense and systematic, organized into rough clusters. He laid it on the table. These are what I remember about the bonds. What they affected. Where they felt like they were. I can't see them the way you can, but I can feel where they were. She unfolded the parchment and read it in silence. He watched her do it, watched her expression as she moved through the list, and saw the controlled anger that moved across her face in a wave and was contained. She looked up when she reached the bottom. You wrote all of this morning. This morning and last night. It might be wrong, I might be misidentifying what was a bond and what was a genuine feeling. But some of them are very clear. He pointed at the third cluster on the list. Those 4. The ones I've labeled, Dumbledore. Every time I thought about him, there was a warmth. Like sun coming out. It didn't matter what he'd done, I'd think about it, feel the warmth, and the critique would dissolve. He paused. That's not something a person chooses to feel. That's something installed. Fleur was reading the cluster with her jaw set. And this one, she said. She pointed to a single entry near the bottom, Voldemort, fear disproportionate to actual threat level. More visceral than logical. Deliberately maintained. I'm less certain about that one, he said. But I've been thinking about it. The fear of Voldemort, I've met him. Twice. I know what he is. Normal fear makes sense. But there's been something in it that felt more like terror. Like something that lived in the chest and didn't respond to reason. That's not how I respond to other dangers. A fear enhancer would keep you reactive instead of strategic, Fleur said. A person who panics is easier to direct than one who plans. Yes. She closed the notebook. She looked at him across the table, and something in her expression changed slightly. The analytical edge didn't soften exactly, but something else came into it. Most people would be in pieces this morning, she said. After learning what you learned last night. I know, he said. I keep waiting to be in pieces. I think the pieces might come later. He considered this honestly. But right now I mostly just want to understand what was done and who did it and why, in that order. The why is probably not complicated, she said. Someone wanted you manageable. Someone wanted me to walk into a death trap when the time came and not ask inconvenient questions on the way there. He said this with the same flat clarity as the night before, and she recognized it again, the quality she'd noticed in the corridor, the complete absence of self-deception. That's what the tournament is. Whatever put my name in that goblet, this tournament is not what it looks like. No, she agreed. It is not. They looked at each other. Outside the library windows the grounds were white and cold and empty, frost on the glass, and the library itself was cathedral still in the early morning. I have a question about last night, Harry said. Ask it. When you're Veela, he paused, finding the right phrasing. When the protective rage happened. Is that something you can control? Or is it fully autonomous? It is not fully autonomous, she said carefully. It requires a genuine trigger. The level of violation it perceived in what was on you, that was sufficient to override my deliberate restraint. She paused. I have experienced it before, once, when I was 13. Someone used a lust compulsion on my younger sister. The rage came then too. She met his eyes steadily. In both cases the target deserved it. I'm not questioning it, he said. I'm asking because I want to understand what you experienced. Not as a threat assessment. Just, you saw something last night and it cost you something, and I didn't get to ask you properly. She was quiet for a moment. This was not the kind of question she received often. It is exhausting, she said. Afterward. Like spending a year of magic in 10 seconds. And it is, disorienting. To lose control of something I work very hard to maintain control of. She touched the handle of her teacup without picking it up. But I am not fragile about it. I have my grandmother's blood. I know, he said, and he said it like he'd already catalogued this as an established fact, which she found unexpectedly warming. Hermione arrived at 9:30. She came in fast and slightly breathless, her hair in a quick braid from what had clearly been a rushed morning, and she found Harry and Fleur at their corner table surrounded by documents and Veela memory vials, and she stopped in the doorway with an expression that was trying very hard to cycle through everything at once. I heard, she said. About last night. Half the school is talking about it. She came to the table and looked at the documents and then at Harry's face and then at Fleur with the specific Hermione expression of someone rapidly updating a great deal of prior knowledge. Are you all right? Better than I've ever been, Harry said. Sit down. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without doing the thing where you immediately defend Dumbledore. Hermione sat down very slowly, her eyes on his face. Harry, 44 compulsion bonds, he said. On me. Since before Hogwarts. The silence was considerable. Hermione looked at Fleur. You saw them. I counted them, Fleur said. Hermione looked back at Harry. He watched her process it, watched the defense mechanism rise and then, because Hermione was Hermione and the evidence was already on the table in front of her and she was constitutionally incapable of arguing with evidence, watched it die. Her face went through several phases quickly. Disbelief, then reevaluation, then a specific kind of controlled horror that he recognized as the expression she wore when something she'd suspected but hadn't examined turned out to be true. Some of the academic records, she said, almost to herself. Your standardized spell results in first year, they were slightly low. Not significantly, not enough to flag, but I noticed. I thought it was the environment, the Dursleys, the lack of formal magical training before Hogwarts. She looked at him. But if your magic was being suppressed, the readings would be artificially low, he said. Yes. She put her elbows on the table and covered her mouth with both hands and thought for about 15 seconds. Then, we need documentation. Before the anchor points fade. We need someone qualified to. I've contacted my mother, Fleur said. She will contact the appropriate people. Hermione looked at her sharply. You've already notified the French ministry. I have notified my mother. She will notify the French ministry. Fleur's tone was even. Harry is a Triwizard champion competing under tournament protections that fall partially under French magical jurisdiction. What was done to him is a violation of those protections, among other things. Among other things, Hermione said carefully. She turned back to Harry. The British ministry has not been notified yet, Harry said. I'd like to control that process a little. Who do you think gave permission? Hermione said. She said it quietly, and she said it like she'd been sitting on the thought for 2 minutes and it had become too heavy not to put down. That many bonds. That level of craft. Someone with ministry access, or someone above ministry oversight, Harry, that level of compulsion work would require sanctioned channels to avoid detection by the standard monitoring spells on Hogwarts. He looked at her. I know. Dumbledore, she said. Not a question. He's my first candidate, Harry said. I'm not certain. I'm going to be very careful about certainty. But the bonds that affected how I perceived him were some of the oldest, and the trust one in particular. He stopped. It felt like his magic. I know what his magic feels like. Every year, up close, the enchantments in this school. I know the feel of it. Hermione was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was very controlled. If it was Dumbledore, the British ministry would protect him. The Wisengamot would protect him. He has 40 years of goodwill and half the government owes him favors. She paused. The French ministry doesn't. No, Fleur said. We do not. Harry looked between them, and despite everything there was something in him that was almost settled, the feeling of being in a room with two people who were genuinely thinking, without filters or installations, just clearly and hard. Then we document everything, he said. We do it properly. We don't move until we have something that can't be dismissed. Agreed, Hermione said. Agreed, said Fleur. 2 floors below the library, in a corridor that connected the dungeons to the east wing of the castle, Alastor Moody, who was not Alastor Moody, was having a very bad morning. Bartemius Crouch Jr. walked with Moody's rolling gait, worn into his legs by 6 months of continuous polyjuice use, and he walked fast because he needed to think, and he thought better in motion. His plan, the Dark Lord's plan, the singular most important operational objective in 30 years of loyal service, was built on a foundation of Harry Potter being controllable, directable, and appropriately afraid. The tournament was the delivery mechanism. The maze was the endpoint. The portkey was the method. And the directionality of it all depended on Harry Potter being managed. He had felt the discharge last night from the defense against the dark arts classroom, where he'd been working late. He'd felt it the way you felt the sound of a building collapsing 3 streets over, a deep, bone-registered vibration that meant something structural had failed. He'd been in the Great Hall within 4 minutes, but the damage was done by then. The Delacour girl was on the floor beside Potter, and Potter was looking at the world with eyes that Barty recognized immediately, with the specific dread of someone who has invested enormously in a certain outcome recognizing the outcome evaporating. That was the look of a person who was no longer suppressed. He'd spent the night revising contingencies, alternatives, salvage. The Dark Lord did not accept failure warmly, and the Dark Lord was waiting, in the grounds of a graveyard in Little Hangleton, in a rudimentary body sustained by Peter Pettigrew's frantic care, for the tournament to deliver Harry Potter to him. The timeline was fixed. The maze was fixed. The portkey was fixed. Everything else was now improvisation. The Delacour girl was the immediate problem. He'd sent one of Moody's enchanted objects to monitor the Ollery overnight, and he knew she'd sent 2 letters north. France. Her family's property was in the south, near Bordeaux, so north meant Paris, which meant the ministry attaché's office. He needed to know what she'd seen. How much she understood. Whether she'd told Potter enough to make him suspicious of the tournament structure itself or just of the bond placer. He needed to talk to Potter. As himself, as Moody, and carefully. The old aura rapport. I know things are strange, Harry. I know you've had a shock. Let me help you understand it. It had worked beautifully for months. The combination of the compulsion bonds and Moody's manufactured confidence had kept Potter oriented correctly toward the tournament, away from the deeper questions. Without the bonds it would need to be better. But Barty Crouch Jr. had been fooling people since he was 17 years old, and he had an excellent teacher. He turned the corner toward the Great Hall and ran directly into Fleur Delacour. She had come from the library, moving fast. She stopped when she saw him. He saw her stop, saw the specific quality of the stop, not surprise exactly, more like recognition of something she'd been peripherally expecting. Professor Moody, she said pleasantly. Mademoiselle Delacour. He kept his voice in Moody's register, rougher and lower than his natural voice, the lifelong habit of 6 months. Heard about last night. Quite a display. It was, she agreed. She was looking at him with Veela attention and he could feel it, which was always unpleasant. The false eye saw through glamours and invisibility but not through polyjuice, and Veela perception was not looking at his body, it was reading something else, something in the air around him. He wasn't sure what she could see, but he was very sure he didn't like the way she was looking at it. Is young Potter all right? He asked. The gruff concern, perfectly calibrated. He is very well, she said. Remarkably well. Expect it's disorienting. Having that kind of magical discharge. He seems to find it clarifying, she said. Something in her tone was pleasant and surface level and approximately 10 meters deep simultaneously. She had, he noted, the specific social skill of a woman who had been handling people who wanted things from her since adolescence. I am glad you came by, actually. I wanted to ask someone with your experience, for my own understanding, academically, what the usual magical signature is for a long-term compulsion network. The kind that might be placed incrementally over years. He kept his face completely still under Moody's scarred skin. That's a specific question. I am a specific person, she said pleasantly. Most people don't think to ask about it, he said. Why are you thinking about it? I saw something last night, she said. As I said, it was clarifying. There was a beat of silence in which she smiled at him with complete warmth, and he looked at her with Moody's electric blue eye and his own black one, and they both understood exactly what the conversation was and was not. I wouldn't know much about that, he said. Dark magic. Not my specialty in that direction. Of course not, she said. Never mind. Thank you, Professor. And she moved past him with the easy grace of someone who has never doubted the ground under their feet. He watched her go and felt the morning get considerably worse. She knew. Or suspected enough that it amounted to the same thing. She wasn't afraid of him. That was the problem with Veela. The protective rage that had been described to him in theory was, in practice, far more concerning than the theory suggested. She'd shattered 44 bonds that had taken Dumbledore decades to build, in a single uncontrolled second, and she was walking down a corridor at 9:30 in the morning looking like someone who had already won the argument and was simply waiting for the other party to catch up. He needed to accelerate the timeline. He needed Potter in the maze before the French got involved properly. Before whatever documentation process the Delacour girl was clearly already assembling reached the point of formal accusation. The tournament had rules about completion. Once you were in, and nobody could pull a champion from the maze without a catastrophic procedural violation that would undo the tournament's magical contract. Once Harry was in the maze, he was Barty's problem to direct, regardless of what the French ministry thought. 6 weeks. The second task was February. The third was June. He had time. What he needed was to keep the situation contained until June, and containment was something he was very good at. He walked toward his office, rolling his walking stick against the stone floor in Moody's rhythm, and he began revising his approach to Harry Potter, minus 44 bonds, unfiltered and clear-eyed and apparently spending his mornings in the library with Fleur Delacour. This was manageable. Everything was manageable. He had the Dark Lord's patience and the Dark Lord's plan and 6 months of invested effort behind him. He had better options than panic. He just needed to think. The library emptied out as the morning went on, students drifting in for books and drifting back out again, and around 11 Hermione excused herself to go to Charms revision with Neville. She left behind 3 pages of notes in her precise handwriting, a list of books she was going to pull from the restricted section by methods she didn't specify, and a look she gave Harry before she left that communicated several things at once, that she believed him completely, that she was furious on his behalf in the contained, dangerous way that Hermione was furious when she was being methodical about it, and that she would burn the library down if it would help. She is very loyal, Fleur said after she'd gone. She is, Harry agreed. She's also the most dangerous person in this school when she's properly motivated. More than you. He considered this. She's a different kind of dangerous. Hermione goes through walls by understanding them completely and then removing every supporting structure. I just go through walls. Fleur looked at him steadily. You went through that wall last night, she said. While sitting perfectly still. You went through it. You let me. She said this as a statement of fact, not a compliment. Most people would have flinched when they felt it coming. You felt it, I know you did, and you held still. He had, in fact, felt it, the Veela surge coming toward him like a warm gale, the ancient force of it, and something in him that had been awake enough to recognize it as not a threat even in the split second before he had any conscious understanding of what it was. He hadn't mentioned this because he wasn't sure what it meant. It didn't feel hostile, he said. It wasn't, she said. But most people's instinct is to defend. My instincts have been wrong about a lot of things, he said. I'm in the process of recalibrating. She smiled slightly. It was different from the smile he'd observed at the opening of the tournament. That one had been social, practiced, beautiful and shallow. This was the actual version, smaller and more real. He filed it. "I want to try something," she said. She extended her hand across the table, the same gesture as the night before. "The anchor points you described, I want to see if I can read them properly. With contact, it's clearer." He put his hand in hers. This time there was no crisis backdrop and no roaring crowd, and the contact was different, quieter and more precise, her Veela senses reaching into the space around his magic with focused attention rather than the blunt force of the night before. "There," she said softly, after a moment. "I can see them. The residuals." Her thumb moved slightly, tracing something only she could perceive. "This group here, 4 of them, tight cluster, these are very old. Pre-Hogwarts, definitely. The magical signature has a quality I've seen in academic compulsion work." She paused. "This is someone who has studied compulsion magic theoretically. These were built from understanding, not from intuition." "Dumbledore," he said. "I'm not certain," she said. "But the craftsmanship is, yes. This is someone who knows what they're doing." Her fingers moved along invisible lines. "And this cluster, 6 of them, see how they're interlocked? These affect ambition. Specifically, upward ambition. Not wanting to be powerful, not wanting recognition, not wanting to lead." He was quiet for a moment. "I've always thought I didn't want any of that," he said. "The fame. The status. I thought it was just, who I was." "It may still be, in part," she said carefully. "The person who placed these cannot create things that are entirely false. They can only amplify what is small and suppress what is large. These bonds," she paused. "They are sophisticated enough to have worked with your actual personality. But they shaped the volume of each quality. So I am someone who genuinely doesn't care about fame," he said. "But I might also be someone with a great deal of genuine ambition that has been sitting at about 5% of its actual level for my entire life." "Yes," she said. He turned this over carefully. The 44 hollow spaces where the bonds had been, he could feel them, still, like healed fractures in a bone. The absence had a shape, and when you felt the shape of an absence you could work out what had been there. He thought about what he might have done without the ambition suppressor. About the choices he might have made. The questions he might have asked. The path through the last 4 years that wasn't the one that had been laid out and smoothed and gently directed. "What would you have done?" Fleur asked. She seemed to be reading something in his face. "If you'd had access to your actual self." "I would have been angrier," he said. "Much earlier. And I would have asked questions." He paused. "I would have learned more. I would have wanted to be better." He looked at her. "I've been walking around at 50% in a school full of people who were doing their level best to teach me. It feels like something was taken from me." "It was," she said. He nodded. "That's the thing I keep coming back to. Not the danger, not the tournament, not even who did it specifically. The years." He said this without self-pity. It was not a self-pity statement, it was a fact statement, delivered with the precise, clean anger of someone who has identified a damage and named it accurately. "The years are what was actually stolen." She did not say "I'm sorry" because she was perceptive enough to know that wasn't what he needed. What she said was, "Then make the years matter going forward." He looked at her. "You have an enormous amount of magic," she said. "You have a mind that works clearly under pressure. I watched it work last night and this morning. You have loyalty from people who chose you genuinely. What was taken from you was your ceiling." She held his gaze. "The ceiling is gone." He was quiet. "Then, your grandmother's memories. The ones in the vials." "Yes." "Can I see them? The ones about the protective rupture specifically. I want to understand what it cost you." She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up the second vial, held it to the window light, and set it back down in front of him. That one, she said. My grandmother is not easy to watch. She is, considerably more Veela than I am. Good, he said. I want to understand it properly. She summoned a small pensive equivalent from the satchel, a shallow stone bowl, Bosbaden's issued, threaded around the rim with silver, and tipped the vial into it. You'll see it from outside, she said. As an observer. My grandmother is going to appear to look directly at you at one point. Don't look away. She'll know, and she'll be offended, and somehow she will communicate this to me. Your grandmother sounds wonderful, he said, which made Fleur laugh, a real one, short and surprised, and then he leaned forward and looked into the bowl. The memory took him, and the library went away. What he saw in the next 8 minutes rearranged several things about his understanding of Veela, of compulsion magic, of what Fleur had experienced last night, and of what, exactly, it meant to have someone go to war on your behalf before they'd consciously chosen to. When the memory released him and the library reassembled around him, he sat back in his chair and looked at his hands for a moment. She is magnificent, he said. He did not mean it in the beautiful woman sense. He meant it in the sense of something enormous and old and uncompromising. She is, Fleur agreed. She also would like you to know that the protective rupture leaves a mark. On both people. She said this with the specific tone of someone relaying information that was slightly uncomfortable but accurate. Nothing harmful. A resonance. Veela history calls it an echo bond. It means we are, aware of each other's magical state. Faintly. Over distance. She paused. I noticed it this morning, when you were in the dormitory. He processed this. What did you notice? That you were well and thinking hard. She met his eyes. And angry. I was angry, he agreed. I am angry. He looked at the middle distance. It's just a clean anger. Not the kind that makes you stupid. That is the right kind, she said. Outside the library windows, the grounds of Hogwarts lay still and frozen. 2 students were attempting to conjure snowballs at each other across the courtyard with no particular accuracy. The morning had moved into something comfortable and ordinary on its surface, and beneath the surface the whole world was very slowly shifting, like tectonic plates moving in the deep dark, not yet visible but already decided. Harry Potter folded his notes and put them in his pocket. I want to start learning, he said. Properly. No ceiling, no filters. Everything the tournament requires and more. He paused. Will you help me? Fleur Delacour looked at him across the table, surrounded by her grandmother's letters and her memory vials and a slim notebook about coercion, and she said, yes. She said it the way her grandmother had taught her to say things that mattered, completely, without reservation, and with the full weight of what she was. The echo bond, faint and new and slightly startling, resonated once between them. The morning moved forward. Chapter 3, The French Don't Forget. The owl arrived at the Beauxbatons carriage at 6:17 in the morning, 3 days after the Yule Ball. Fleur knew it was her mother's before she was fully awake, because her mother's owl, a large, imperious chouette Frey named Marguerite who had the personality of a senior civil servant, made a specific sound when landing that was less thump and more announcement. Fleur sat up in the dark of her cabin, lit her wand, and broke the seal before the bird had finished rearranging its feathers. The letter was 2 pages in her mother's precise hand, and by the end of the first paragraph Fleur was fully awake. Apollon Rousseau has been briefed, her mother wrote, and Fleur recognized immediately that her mother was using the minister's full name rather than the minister, which was her mother's way of communicating urgency without using the word urgent. She has been briefed by me, personally, at her home, last night. I did not go through official channels. She asked that I not, once she understood what I was telling her. She says, and I am quoting directly because you deserve the exact words, this is not a ministry matter yet. This is a Delacour matter first, and I want to understand it completely before it becomes anything else. She is sending Marianne Beaumont to Hogwarts. You know Marianne. She is the best curse breaker in the Department of Magical Coercion, and she has never in 40 years of practice been rattled by anything. Apollon says she will be there by tomorrow morning. She will pose as a Ministry Magical Education Inspector, routine visit, nothing alarming, and you are to give her access to the boy immediately. Fleur. I know you. I know what the protective rupture is. Grandmere Solange wrote me the same night she wrote you. She described what the echo bond means and what it means that it formed. I am not alarmed by this. I want you to understand that I am not alarmed by this. Your grandmother was not alarmed by this either, which is the more meaningful statement given that she is alarmed by almost everything. What I want is for you to be careful, not with your heart, which I trust, but with the politics. What you've stepped into is very large and it will not be resolved quickly. Send me everything you have documented. Every anchor point, every cluster, every detail. We will need it. Your father sends his love. Gabrielle has been asking questions I am deflecting masterfully. Maman Fleur read it twice, then set it down and sat in the dark for a moment. Marianne Beaumont. She had met Marianne twice, once at a ministry reception when Fleur was 16, and once at her grandmother's house in Perpignan, where Marianne had come to consult Solange about a coercion case and had spent 4 hours at the kitchen table drinking her grandmother's terrible coffee and speaking in the specific shorthand of two people who had seen too much of what humans did to each other with magic. Marianne was small and sharp-eyed and had the quality of someone who had permanently dispensed with small talk, and she was, by reputation, the kind of cursebreaker who could read a magical crime scene the way a good detective read a room. She dressed quickly and went to find Harry. He was on the grounds. She found him on the east lawn in the grey 6:45 light, in the cold that still tasted of last night's frost, moving through a sequence of wandless spellwork that stopped her at the edge of the lawn for a moment before she announced herself. It wasn't showy. He wasn't throwing fire or levitating boulders. He was running precision drills, lifting and placing a row of stones with focused intention, varying size and weight, the movements deliberate and slightly experimental, like someone learning the actual range of a muscle they'd been told was weaker than it was. The stones moved cleanly. No wobble, no overcorrection. He'd been at this for a while. She crossed the lawn and he looked up without surprise. The echo bond, still new and faintly startling, a low warmth at the back of her awareness, had presumably announced her before her footsteps did. Your mother wrote, she said, which was not a question. This morning, he said. He set the stones down in a neat row. His breath fogged in the cold air. Marianne Beaumont is coming. She stopped. How do you know that name? I've been reading about the French Department of Magical Coercion since yesterday afternoon, he said, completely without apology. When you said your mother would contact the ministry, I thought I should understand who I was likely to be dealing with. Beaumont is the head of curse breaking in that department. If your mother went to the right person, Beaumont comes next. He looked at her. Is that wrong? It is exactly right, she said. She arrives tomorrow morning. He nodded. He looked back at the stones for a moment, then looked up at the castle, the mass of it against the pale sky, windows beginning to glow yellow as the school woke up inside it. I've been thinking about who else needs to know before she arrives. Hermione already knows. Hermione knows about the bonds, he said. She doesn't know about Beaumont coming. And she doesn't know what I've been thinking about regarding Moody. Fleur went still. Say that again. He turned to face her fully. The day after the ball. When you came back from breakfast. You passed Moody in the corridor. I remember. And you told me that evening that the conversation felt wrong. That his Veela perception read strangely on him. He paused. I've been thinking about that. Moody's magical profile, the way his eye works, the way his magic sits on him, I can feel it now, with my own magic unfiltered. I can feel the edges of people's magical signatures when I'm close enough. Moody's signature has something false in it. Polyjuice, she said. The word landed between them. He looked at her steadily. That was my conclusion too, he said. I don't know who. But the person inside Moody's body is not Moody. And that person has had unrestricted access to this school and to me for 6 months, and has been one of my primary sources of tournament guidance. The cold morning air was very quiet. The tournament tasks, Fleur said. Yes. His voice was even and he was not afraid, which was exactly what she'd expect from him now, and which still carried a particular weight given the implications. Someone who isn't Moody has been steering me toward the tournament and presumably toward whatever the tournament is actually for. Which connects back to whoever put the bonds on me, because they both need the same thing, Harry Potter walking in the right direction without asking questions. They may not be the same person, she said. No. But they're working toward the same end. He looked at the castle again. I've been putting the shape of it together. The bonds are old, Dumbledore, most likely, whatever his reasons. But the tournament itself, my name in the goblet, the false Moody, that's someone else. Someone who's using the tournament for a specific purpose. Voldemort, she said. Yes. Flat and simple, no terror in it, just acknowledgement of a fact. She noted this, noted the absence of the fear spike she'd observed in others when they said that name. The bond Hermione had identified as a fear enhancer was gone, and what was left was the natural, calibrated wariness of someone who had met the thing in question and knew its actual dimensions. Someone is trying to use the tournament to get me to Voldemort. And whoever it is, they've been running this plan for 6 months minimum. Moody is placed here for the entire school year, she said slowly. Since September. Yes. So the plan needed me in the tournament from September onward. Which means someone submitted my name before September, because the goblet needs time to, he stopped. It's been running since before the tournament started. Since before the school year. Since the goblet was set up. The goblet was set up here in the summer, Fleur said. During the preparations. Someone had access during the summer. He looked at her. Someone who knew about the bonds and was either coordinating with whoever placed them, or using the bond structure as an existing tool that suited their own plan. She thought about the intricate architecture she'd seen on him at the ball, the 44 threads, the layered patience of it. It was the work of a mind that thought in decades. And the tournament plan felt different, more urgent, more linear, built around a fixed endpoint. 2 different minds, she thought. Possibly in coordination. Possibly not even fully aware of each other. We need to tell Beaumont all of this, she said. Yes. But carefully. He looked at her. There's someone I want to bring in before she arrives. Who? Sirius, he said. Sirius Black's reply came by midday, carried by a ragged-looking hawk that arrived at a window in the Gryffindor common room and deposited the letter with the air of an animal that had been traveling fast and wanted acknowledgement of this fact. Harry read it again, and handed it to Hermione. The letter was brief and had the specific energy of someone who had been handed a match near a powder keg and was exercising restraint with some difficulty. Harry, 44. I need a moment. Right. I've had the moment. This is Dumbledore. I know you haven't confirmed it and I know you're being careful about certainty and I respect that, but I know it. I've known something was wrong with you for years, not wrong with you, wrong about you, like there was a version of you I kept almost seeing and then it would be gone. I thought it was the circumstances. I thought it was the Dursleys. It wasn't. Don't confront him. Not yet. Not directly. He will smile and manage it and you'll lose the element of surprise. The element of surprise, right now, is the only structural advantage you have over a man who has had decades to build his position. The French cursebreaker is the right move. Let them document. Let them build the case properly. I'm moving. I'll be closer by the weekend. Don't do anything spectacular until I'm there. Although knowing you, you'll have done 3 spectacular things by the time this letter arrives. Padfoot P.S. Tell the Delacour girl her grandmother is Solange Delacour of the 1962 Coercion Treaty, and if she is half the woman her grandmother was, we are all going to be fine. Harry passed it to Fleur without comment. She read the postscript and something moved across her face that was warm and private. He knows his history, she said. He knows a lot of things, Harry said. He was framed and imprisoned for 12 years by people who were also very confident they could manage things. He would understand the shape of it, Hermione said quietly. She had been reading her own version of the letter over Harry's shoulder, and she set it down on the table between them with the neat decisiveness of someone closing a chapter. He would understand being moved around by people who thought they knew best. He'll be close by the weekend, Harry said. That's good. He looked at the window, at the winter grounds beyond it, and then at Hermione. How are you with the restricted section books? I have 3, she said, and produced them from her bag with the slightly guilty speed of someone who had borrowed them without the standard authorization procedure. One is directly relevant, it's a comprehensive text on magical coercion law across British, French, and international jurisdiction. The relevant part is Chapter 14, which covers the protections afforded to subjects of international treaty. She opened it to a marked page. Triwizard champions are afforded specific protections under the tournament's governing charter, which was last updated in 1754. Those protections include immunity from magical interference with the champion's free will, judgment, and magical capacity for the duration of the tournament. She looked up. The bonds were placed before the tournament, Harry said. Yes, but they were active during it, Hermione said. They were functioning. They were affecting his magical capacity and his judgment during the tournament period. That triggers the charter protections retroactively. She tapped the page. Article 7, Section 3. Any magical interference found to be active upon a champion during the tournament period is considered a violation of the charter regardless of when the interference was originally placed. This is French law, Harry said. It's international tournament law, Hermione said. Which France enforces because the tournament is historically rooted in French magical tradition. The British ministry has signatory obligations, but enforcement falls primarily to the host nation, France, and the presiding tournament authority. Beauxbatons and Hogwarts are co-hosting, Fleur said. Which means France has direct jurisdiction. She paused. Which is why Rousseau is moving carefully. She doesn't want this to look like France picking a fight with Britain. She wants it to look like what it is, France enforcing international treaty law in a case where the evidence is clear. The evidence being Beaumont's documentation, Harry said. And your testimony, Hermione said. And mine, potentially, as a witness to the state of Harry's magic before and after. She paused. And the physical anchor points. Those are the most important, they're objective. They can't be argued away. How long do the anchor points last? Harry asked Fleur. My grandmother's notes say up to 3 weeks for the strongest ones. She looked at her hands. It has been 3 days. We have time, but not unlimited time. Tomorrow, Harry said. The moment Beaumont arrives. Beaumont arrived at 8:15 the following morning in the company of a Hogwarts owl carrying a ministry letter that identified her as Madame Celestine Moreau, Educational Standards Inspector from the Department of International Magical Cooperation. She was small, perhaps 60, with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of posture that came from decades of walking into rooms where she was underestimated and finding this useful. She wore charcoal gray robes with no ornamentation and carried a single bag that was considerably larger on the inside than the outside. Fleur met her at the gates. You look like your mother, Beaumont said in French, without preamble. Your grandmother sends her regards and several opinions I will relay later when there is time. Is the boy here? He's in the library, Fleur said. Good. Take me there. Don't introduce me as Beaumont to anyone outside your trusted circle. And brief me on the way. I read your documentation, I want the details you didn't write down. They crossed the grounds fast, and Fleur talked, and Beaumont listened with the absolute focused attention of someone taking a deposition. She asked 3 sharp questions about the bond clusters and said nothing else until they reached the library door. She stopped outside it. "The Echo Bond," she said. "Your grandmother mentioned it." "Yes," Fleur said. "Good," Beaumont said simply, which was not the response Fleur had expected. "It means your perception of his magical state is reliable. I'll need that." She pushed the door open and walked in. Harry was at the corner table. Hermione was beside him with 3 books open, and he stood when they entered with the easy confidence of someone who had been expecting this and had prepared for it, not nervously, but the way you prepared for something that mattered. Beaumont looked at him for a long moment with her sharp eyes. He looked back at her without discomfort. "Monsieur Potter," she said, switching to accented English. "Madame Beaumont," he said. Her eyes didn't flicker at the name. "Thank you for coming quickly." "Sit," she said, pulling out a chair across from him. She opened her bag and extracted a flat stone disc, larger than the Beauxbatons pensive equivalent Fleur carried, deeply engraved around the rim with detection runes. "This will read the anchor points. It will be cold and slightly uncomfortable. It is not harmful. I will need to work without interruption for approximately 20 minutes. She looked at him steadily. "I also need you to understand that what I record becomes part of a formal French ministry file. It cannot be unrecorded. Do you consent to this?" "Yes," he said. No hesitation. She looked at Fleur. "You've explained the implications." "He understands them," Fleur said. Beaumont looked back at Harry. "You understand that formal documentation means formal process. Once this file opens, France will move through it to its conclusion, regardless of what Britain prefers." "I'm counting on that," Harry said. Something in Beaumont's expression shifted, not softened exactly, but acknowledged. She placed the stone disc between them and activated it with her wand, and the runes lit in a cold blue-white light, and she began to work. The process looked, from the outside, like nothing at all. Beaumont held her wand very still, not moving it, just maintaining the activation. The disc hummed faintly. Harry sat with his hands flat on the table, breathing steady, and Fleur watched the anchor points flare slightly in her Veela perception as the disc's detection field passed over them one by one. At the 4-minute mark, Beaumont said, 42 visible anchor points. 44 bonds, Harry said. 2 have already faded below detection threshold, Beaumont said, without particular emotion. That is consistent with the weakest bonds dissolving first. The remaining 42 are clearly defined. She continued working. At the 12-minute mark she said, these oldest ones, prepubescent placement. The magical signature on these, she paused for the first time. The pause lasted several seconds. Beaumont, Fleur said. I know this signature, Beaumont said. Her voice was level and completely flat. I have encountered it twice before in my career. Both times in historical cases. She looked up at Harry. This is Albus Dumbledore's work. The library was very quiet. You're certain? Hermione said, and her voice was carefully controlled. My certainty is 97%, Beaumont said. I have compared it against 3 documented samples from Hogwarts' own enchantments, which carry his signature freely in the stone of this building. It is the same. She looked at Harry. I am sorry. Don't be, Harry said. I already knew. Beaumont looked at him for a moment. Then she turned back to the disc and continued. At the 20-minute mark she closed the recording, lifted the disc, and held it briefly in both hands while it sealed itself with a soft click. 42 documented anchor points, she said. Magical signature consistent with Albus Dumbledore on 38 of them. The remaining 4 have a different signature. I will need to analyze it against available records, but it is not Dumbledore's and it is not any signature I recognize offhand. She looked at Fleur. These 4 are newer. The most recent placement is within the past 6 months. Someone else was adding to the network, Hermione said. Adding to it, or, wait. Fleur looked at Harry. The fear enhancer you identified. The one that felt different from the others. The 4 I wasn't sure about, he said. The ones that felt more instinctive. More animal. Moody, Fleur said. Or whoever is wearing Moody's face. Beaumont set the disc down very carefully. Explain that. Harry told her about Moody, the displaced magical signature, the false quality, the polyjuice conclusion. He told it plainly and quickly, without drama, with the specific credibility of someone who had thought it through before speaking. Beaumont listened without interrupting. When he finished, she sat back and looked at the ceiling for about 3 seconds. Then, you are describing a Death Eater using polyjuice to impersonate a senior Auror for an entire school year, with the objective of delivering you to Voldemort via this tournament. Yes, Harry said. And the existing bond network, Dumbledore's work, was being used, probably without Dumbledore's knowledge, as a suppression tool to keep you manageable while this person ran their operation. That's my reading, Harry said. 2 separate actors, Hermione said. One long-term, Dumbledore, who placed bonds over years to manage Harry for his own reasons. One short-term, whoever is impersonating Moody, who added 4 bonds recently to enhance fear and compliance specifically for the tournament period, possibly piggybacking on an existing network they discovered was already in place. Beaumont was quiet for a long moment. She picked up the disc and turned it in her hands. How long have you been working through this? She asked Harry. 3 days, he said. She looked at Fleur. Then back at Harry. Minister Rousseau will want to speak with you directly, she said. I can't promise you it will be comfortable. She is a very direct woman and she will ask questions, some of which will be unpleasant. That's fine, Harry said. I prefer direct. Good. Beaumont stood and put the disc carefully into her bag. I need to send this to Paris immediately. I will use the Beauxbatons Ollery, I trust it more than Hogwarts at present. She looked at Fleur. Your mother will receive confirmation by this afternoon. The minister will move within 24 hours of that. How fast? Fleur asked. Rousseau. Beaumont considered. When she has documentation like this in her hand and an international treaty violation on the table, fast. She paused. She was the one who prosecuted the last ministry case involving coercion of a minor, 12 years ago. She is not objective about it. Good, Harry said. Beaumont looked at him once more with her sharp eyes. Something in the look was, Fleur thought, something close to approval, the specific approval of a professional who'd expected a frightened child and found a clear-eyed young man with a documented case and a working theory. Don't confront Dumbledore, Beaumont said. Not yet. I know, Harry said. And don't confront Moody under any circumstances, she said. If he suspects the plan is unraveling, he may move the timeline forward, and his objective is to get you alone and physically transport you to Voldemort. The tournament tasks are the most likely vehicle. I've thought about that, Harry said. The second task is February 24th. That's 6 weeks. Yes. Beaumont picked up her bag. We have 6 weeks to complete the documentation, build the formal case, have Rousseau make the official declaration, and expose the fake Moody before he can use the task as an opportunity. She looked at Harry. That should be sufficient. Unless he panics. He struck me as someone who doesn't panic easily, Harry said. No, Beaumont agreed. But he will feel the pressure of the investigation moving toward him. Cornered people do unpredictable things. She moved toward the door and then stopped. One more question. Dumbledore, he will know something is happening once Rousseau arrives. He will attempt to manage it. He always does. He is, in my professional opinion, one of the most naturally gifted political managers alive. He is, Harry said. He's been managing me my whole life. A pause. He'll find it's different now. Beaumont left. Dumbledore found Harry in the corridor outside the Great Hall before dinner. It was clearly not accidental. He came from the direction of his office with the specific purposeful casual walk of someone who had timed an apparently spontaneous encounter. Harry felt it coming 30 seconds before it arrived through the echo bond, not Fleur nearby, but his own magic now attuned enough to the emotional texture of the school that certain things registered at a low level. Dumbledore's magic had a particular feel to it. Old, vast, and currently running a gentle outward emanation of warmth and trustworthiness that Harry recognized immediately as deliberate. He was deploying his ambient magic the way Fleur deployed her Veela aura. Projecting. Managing the room. Harry noted this and said nothing about it. "Harry," Dumbledore said, falling into step beside him. "I've been hoping to catch you. How are you feeling?" The ball was eventful. "I feel well," Harry said. He matched Dumbledore's pace without effort. "Better than I have in years, actually." "Good, good." A gentle pause. Mademoiselle Delacour's Veela surge, these things can be unsettling for the people caught in them. There can be after effects. Disorientation, emotional volatility. "I haven't experienced anything like that," Harry said. "No. Nothing unusual in how you're feeling?" "No sense of," another gentle pause, this one shaped like an invitation. "Estrangement, perhaps. Seeing things differently than you used to." Harry looked at him. "Should I be experiencing that?" Dumbledore smiled, warm, grandfatherly, perfectly pitched. "Not necessarily. I only want to make sure you're supported. You know you can come to me with anything, Harry. Anything at all." "I know," Harry said. He kept his voice easy and open, the tone of someone being straightforward. He did not let any of the 42 empty anchor points inform his expression. "I appreciate that, Professor. Actually, I've been thinking about Moody." Slight pause. "Very slight, professionally slight, but there." "Oh. He suggested last week that I focus my second task preparation on water-breathing options," Harry said. "Given that the first task involved dragons, it seems like a reasonable suggestion, but I wanted to check with you, is that the kind of specific guidance that's appropriate? I wasn't sure if Moody was supposed to know the task details." The question was completely reasonable. The question was precisely designed to be completely reasonable while landing somewhere specific. Dumbledore's ambient magic, the warm emanation, pulsed once, fractionally harder. Like a hand pressed more firmly on a surface. Harry felt it and let it wash over him and do nothing, which was probably the most disorienting thing that had happened to Dumbledore all week. "Alastor has always taken a personal interest in your development," Dumbledore said. "I wouldn't read too much into the specificity." "Of course," Harry said. "That makes sense. Thank you, Professor." He turned toward the Great Hall entrance. "I should get to dinner. But it was good to talk." He went in without looking back. At the Gryffindor table, Hermione looked up from her book when he sat down and read his face with the accuracy of someone who had been reading his face for 4 years. "Dumbledore," she said. "Just now. In the corridor. He's checking on the installation," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "Found it gone," Harry said. He picked up his fork. Pushed harder. Didn't land. He glanced at her. "He's worried but he's not panicking. He still thinks he can manage it." "He's managed everything for 40 years, Hermione said. "He won't expect it not to work." "No," Harry said. "Which is the most useful thing about him at the moment." He looked across the hall to the Beauxbatons table. Fleur was there, talking to one of her schoolmates, her back to him, but the echo bond gave a small, warm pulse of "I noticed that you talked to him," which was not words but was communicative in a way that was, he was finding, increasingly natural. He focused on his food. Ron arrived 2 minutes later and sat down with the loud energy of someone who had spent the day in Quidditch theory and wanted to discuss it at length. Harry let him talk and answered at appropriate points and thought, in a parallel track, about Barty Crouch Jr. walking around in Alastor Moody's body. The fake Moody would be feeling the shift. 3 days of Harry behaving differently, thinking clearly, asking the wrong questions. It was subtle, but someone running an operational plan would be monitoring it. Whoever was in that body was smart and patient and had been successfully impersonating a paranoid Auror for 6 months, which was not something an idiot could do. They would be watching him more carefully now. Good. Let them watch. After dinner, he went to the room off the third-floor corridor that he and Hermione had identified on their second day of planning, a classroom that hadn't been used in 2 years, thick stone walls, no portraits, no enchanted objects that could carry information. Fleur arrived 2 minutes after him, and Hermione 2 minutes after that. Beaumont sent the disc, Fleur said. My mother confirmed receipt. Rousseau has seen it. Already? Hermione said. Beaumont sent it at 9 this morning. Rousseau was waiting. Fleur set her satchel on a desk. My mother says the minister read the full documentation and was very quiet for a long time, which those who know her say is more alarming than shouting. She looked at Harry. She will be here in 48 hours. 2 days, Harry said. 2 days. Fleur paused. She is not coming as a tourist. She will arrive with a delegation, 3 cursebreakers, a ministry legal advocate, and a representative of the International Confederation of Wizards. She will invoke Article 7 of the tournament charter formally and on the record, which means Hogwarts administration will be officially notified and cannot pretend ignorance. Dumbledore will be officially notified, Hermione said. Yes, Fleur said. And he will know then that it is no longer manageable by ordinary means. He'll prepare, Harry said. He's been preparing since the ball. 2 days is enough time for him to build a very solid defensive position. He thought for a moment. What he'll argue is that the bonds were protective. That he placed them with good intention and for Harry's safety. He'll position it as guardianship rather than coercion. That argument fails under Article 7, Hermione said, pulling out her notes. The charter doesn't allow exceptions for intent. The violation is objective. Bonds were active during the tournament, affecting magical capacity and judgment. It doesn't matter why they were placed. Legally, no, Harry said. But Dumbledore doesn't rely on legal arguments. He relies on people wanting to believe him. He looked at both of them. The people in that room when Rousseau arrives will want to believe him. His entire career is a structure built on people wanting to believe him. Then we need the room to contain people who don't have that impulse, Fleur said. She met Harry's eyes. Beaumont doesn't. Rousseau doesn't. I don't. A pause. Your godfather doesn't, by the sound of his letter. Sirius will be close by the weekend, Harry said. Can he attend a meeting? Hermione asked. He's a fugitive from British justice, Harry said. He can't walk in the front door. He thought for a moment. But he can be available. Nearby. If something goes wrong. Define goes wrong, Hermione said. If Dumbledore decides that the French delegation's arrival is the moment to take direct action to reassert control of me, Harry said. He said this very calmly, the way you said things you'd already thought through completely. He won't do that. He's too careful and too political and too aware that visible coercion of a student in front of an international delegation would be catastrophic. But I'd like Sirius nearby anyway. Fleur was watching him. The echo bond moved, something settled, something resolved. He felt it as a warmth at the edges of his awareness, which was her own read on the situation. 2 days, she said. We prepare. We prepare, he agreed. He looked around the unused classroom, the dusty desks, the dark windows, the cold stone. 2 days ago he had been sitting at the Yule Ball trying to get through an evening, moving through his life at 50% with 44 invisible hands guiding him gently toward whatever ending someone else had designed. He thought about Dumbledore in the corridor, pushing his ambient magic outward like a kind hand on a shoulder, finding nothing there to hold. He thought about Beaumont's disc sealed shut with 42 documented anchor points. He thought about Apollon Rousseau reading the file in Paris and being very quiet for a long time. He thought, 2 days. That night, in the room off the 3rd floor, while Fleur cross-referenced her grandmother's letters with Beaumont's formal notation system and Hermione built a clean legal timeline, Harry practiced. No wand. He didn't need one, or rather, he understood now that he hadn't needed one for years, and the understanding that he didn't was one of the many things that had been sitting in a box that was now open. He sat in the middle of the room with his magic moving through him in long, easy waves, and he practiced the things he hadn't known he could do with it. At some point Fleur looked up from her letters and watched him for a moment without comment, her Veela perception reading the shape of what he was doing with the same quality as sight but deeper. He looked at her. The echo bond ran warm between them. She went back to her letters. He went back to his practice. Outside the castle, the grounds were dark and still, and 48 hours away the French Minister for Magic was boarding a private portkey in Paris, carrying a sealed file and the very specific fury of someone who had spent 30 years protecting magical France and had just discovered what had been done to a child under her treaty protections. The world was shifting. It was shifting fast. Chapter 4, Declarations. Apollon Rousseau arrived on a Thursday morning and the weather suited her. The sky over Hogwarts had been building towards something since dawn, heavy clouds coming in from the north, low and dark, the kind that didn't bother with snow and went straight to the deep register cold that settled into stone and didn't leave until March. By the time the French delegation came through the main gates at 9 sharp, the first sleet was coming in sideways off the lake, and nobody who saw them would have described the arrival as anything other than deliberate. Rousseau led. She was perhaps 60, with iron-gray hair cut bluntly at the jaw and the posture of someone who had decided, probably in her 30s, that she was done performing approachability. She wore deep blue ministry robes with a tricolor pin at the collar, and she moved across the Hogwarts grounds with the absolute purposeful stride of a person who had been somewhere important before this and would be somewhere important after and had calibrated exactly how long this was going to take. Behind her came Beaumont, familiar and sharp. 3 curse-breakers in grey, each carrying a case. A young legal advocate in his 30s who looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. And lastly, slightly separate from the group, a small woman in ICW observer's robes with a badge that caught the sleetlight. Fleur watched them from the entrance steps, Harry on her left and Hermione on his other side. "She's angrier than she looks," Fleur said quietly. "She looks very angry," Hermione said. "Yes," Fleur agreed. Harry said nothing. He watched the delegation come up the steps with the focused, calibrating attention that was his natural mode now, reading them the way his magic read the room, the pressure of Rousseau's authority ahead of her like a bow wave, the controlled professional energy of Beaumont, the ICW observer's deliberate neutrality. He had spent 2 days preparing for this meeting. He was ready. McGonagall met them at the top of the steps. She had been told, officially, by a letter from the French ministry that had arrived yesterday afternoon, that an educational standards inspection was scheduled for today. The letter had been polite and procedurally impeccable and had contained, in its 3rd paragraph, a single sentence about matters pertaining to Article 7 of the Triwizard Tournament Charter that had caused McGonagall to go very still when she read it. Harry knew this because Hermione had been in the room with her when she read it. McGonagall looked at Rousseau now with the expression of someone who had built up 30 years of institutional loyalty and was watching it develop structural cracks in real time. "Minister Rousseau," she said. "Welcome to Hogwarts. I've been asked to escort you to the headmaster's office," Rousseau said. Her English was precise and unaccented in the way that people who learned it formally rather than naturally achieved. "Immediately, please. I understand Professor Dumbledore has been informed of our arrival." "He has." McGonagall looked at the delegation. Then at Harry. Something in her face was asking him a question. He held her gaze steadily and she looked away first. This way. They went up. The headmaster's office was too small for 12 people and Dumbledore had not attempted to enlarge it, which Harry noted as he took a position near the wall with Fleur beside him. The choice was deliberate, home ground, intimate scale, the kind of environment where Dumbledore's presence filled the room naturally and visitors felt the weight of his accumulated history. The portraits of former headmasters lined the walls, some of them already awake and watching. Fawkes sat on his perch and regarded the room with bright, patient eyes. Dumbledore stood behind his desk. He looked exactly like himself. Calm, warm, ancient in the best possible sense, the long silver beard, the half-moon spectacles, the expression of a man who had weathered a great deal and found equanimity on the other side of it. His robes were a deep midnight blue, which Harry noted was probably not accidental given the French delegation's colors. "Minister Rousseau," he said, and his voice was the voice Harry had grown up trusting, layered and warm and containing in it the specific quality of someone who fundamentally believed they were the wisest person in any room. "What a pleasure." "Please, everyone, I'll stand," Rousseau said. She placed her case on the desk between them with a sound that was precisely not a slam but carried all the intention of one. "Thank you for making yourself available, Professor Dumbledore. I'll be direct, since I imagine you'd prefer that." "I always prefer directness," Dumbledore said pleasantly. "Then we understand each other." She opened the case and extracted a sealed document, the kind that glowed faintly at the edges with authentication magic, Ministry of Magic France embossed on the cover. She set it on the desk. "This is a formal notice of treaty investigation under Article 7, Section 3 of the Triwizard Tournament Charter of 1754, as co-signed by the British Ministry, Beauxbatons Academy, Hogwarts School, and the International Confederation of Wizards. The investigation pertains to documented magical interference with the person of Harry James Potter, currently enrolled as a Triwizard champion." Dumbledore looked at the document. He did not pick it up immediately. "May I ask what evidence?" "You may read the attached documentation," Rousseau said. "It includes 42 documented anchor points taken from Mr. Potter's magical body 3 days ago by Marianne Beaumont, head of curse-breaking for the French Department of Magical Coercion. It includes Beaumont's analysis of those anchor points, her signature identification, and her formal findings." A pause. "Her findings are that 38 of those 42 anchor points carry a magical signature consistent with yours, Professor." The room was very quiet. The portraits on the walls were very still, which was unusual because portraits were almost never still. Dumbledore picked up the document. He opened it and read, and Harry watched him do it, watched the face of a man who had spent decades managing outcomes read something that was not manageable in the ordinary way. His expression did not change dramatically. That was the remarkable thing. A lesser politician would have flinched or blanched or offered an immediate denial. Dumbledore read the document with the focused attention of someone understanding its full dimensions, and when he set it down his face was simply thoughtful. "I see," he said. "I hope you do," Rousseau said. "Because what I see, Professor Dumbledore, is a child who has been subjected to 44 separate compulsion bonds over the course of his life, beginning, by Beaumont's estimate, before the age of 5. A child who has competed in an international tournament under French co-jurisdiction while those bonds were actively suppressing his magical capacity and interfering with his judgment." Her voice was controlled and completely implacable, the voice of someone who has been angry for 2 days and converted the anger into something more useful. "Under Article 7 that is a treaty violation. Under French magical law, specifically the Statute of Magical Coercion 1948, it is a criminal offense. Under international law it is both." McGonagall made a sound. Not a word, just a sound, brief and involuntary, the sound of a woman processing something she had not fully believed until this moment despite having suspected it. "Minerva," Dumbledore said, and his voice was gentle. "Don't," McGonagall said. It was one word and it was very quiet and it was more devastating than shouting would have been. She looked at him. "Don't." Dumbledore looked at her for a moment, and something moved behind his eyes, something Harry couldn't name, something that was not simple, because Dumbledore was not a simple person. He looked back at Rousseau. "I would like to explain," he said. "You will have the opportunity," Rousseau said. "That is why we are here. The investigation is formal, which means you are entitled to respond. But I want to be clear about what this is and what it is not. This is not a misunderstanding. I am here to help you manage. This is a documented treaty violation and my office will pursue it to its conclusion." "And what conclusion do you envision?" Dumbledore asked. "That depends on what you tell me." She sat down, the first time she'd sat since she arrived, and the act of sitting was itself authoritative, the deliberate settling of someone who was going to be here as long as it took. "Start with why." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Harry stood by the wall and watched Albus Dumbledore decide how to answer a question he had probably never expected to be asked by anyone with the power to make it matter. He watched the old man consider versions of the truth, weigh them, assess them, the deeply practiced habit of a man who had been telling necessary partial truths for so long that the process was nearly automatic. Then Dumbledore took off his spectacles, set them on the desk, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. It was the most human gesture Harry had ever seen him make. "Harry," he said, looking at him directly for the first time since the meeting started. "I owe you an explanation that is separate from whatever legal process Minister Rousseau conducts. May I speak to you plainly?" "You can speak plainly here," Harry said. "In front of everyone in this room." "I prefer it." Something flickered in Dumbledore's eyes. Possibly respect. Possibly something more complicated. "Very well." He folded his hands on his desk. "When you survived Voldemort as an infant, when the curse rebounded and he was destroyed, I made a series of decisions about what your life would need to be. About what you would need to become." He looked at Harry without the grandfatherly warmth, for once. Just directly. "I knew what was ahead of you." The prophecy, he caught himself, and Harry saw Rousseau's eyes sharpen. "There were things I understood about your future that made your path clear to me. I needed you to reach a certain point. To be a certain kind of person. A manageable one," Harry said. "A protected one," Dumbledore said. "Harry, the compulsions were not designed to harm you. They were designed to keep you safe. To keep you from drawing attention, from exercising power you had no context for, from asking questions you didn't want asked," Harry said. "From making choices that would have gotten you killed before you were ready," Dumbledore said, and his voice carried genuine feeling, which was almost worse than if it had been cold. "You don't know the number of times, the threats, the people who would have come for you if you had been anything other than what you appeared to be. A manageable boy. An ordinary student. The bonds kept you below the horizon of, the bonds suppressed 44 aspects of his personhood," Rousseau said, cutting across the explanation with the clean precision of a blade. "They suppressed his magical capacity, his ambition, his ability to critically evaluate the people around him, his appropriate fear responses, and his capacity to form independent loyalties. You did not keep him safe. You kept him small." She looked at him with the flat, specific fury of someone who has heard this argument before and has no patience for it. "The intent to protect does not change the nature of the act, Professor." "No," Dumbledore said quietly. "I don't suppose it does." The admission landed in the room with considerable weight. Harry felt Fleur go still beside him. He felt Hermione's breath catch. He did not feel anything shatter or give way inside himself, which told him that he'd already processed this, had already done, in the dark of the dormitory over 3 nights, the work of accepting it, and what was left was not grief or rage but the cold clarity of someone who has named a thing accurately and is now deciding what to do with that name. 4 of the anchor points carry a different signature," Harry said. "Not yours." Dumbledore looked at him. "Recent placement," Harry continued. "Within the past 6 months. Fear enhancement and compliance modification." He paused. "Did you place those?" "No," Dumbledore said. "Do you know who did?" A pause. Longer than it should have been, and Harry watched it be longer than it should have been. I have suspicions, Dumbledore said. Then share them, Rousseau said. There is an aspect of the situation at Hogwarts this year that I have been investigating carefully, Dumbledore said. I had concerns about Alastor's behavior from early in the term. He did not seem entirely himself. But without proof, he's not moody, Harry said. He's using polyjuice. Has been since September at least. The room turned toward him. I don't know who he is yet, Harry said. But the magical signature on those 4 bonds doesn't match Moody's documented signature from his aura records. Beaumont confirmed that this morning. He looked at Rousseau. I've requested those records from the aura office through indirect channels, Sirius Black's former partner, who owes him a favor. We should have them by tomorrow. Rousseau looked at him with an expression that had something new in it. Not quite surprise. More like the recalibration of an expectation. You've been investigating independently, she said. For 4 days, Harry said. I didn't have the documentation resources of the French ministry, but I had time and a clear head. How old are you? 14. She looked at him for another moment. Then back at Dumbledore. The impersonation of a ministry aura on Hogwarts grounds is a British matter primarily, but given the overlap with our treaty investigation we will cooperate with any process you initiate. She paused. We will also conduct our own parallel investigation, since the 4 bonds placed by this impersonator constitute a direct additional violation of the tournament charter. Dumbledore picked up his spectacles and put them back on. He looked, not broken, not defiant. He looked like a man standing in the wreckage of a decision made a long time ago, seeing it clearly for probably the first time. What happens next? He asked. You will provide a full sworn statement to my legal advocate, Rousseau said. Today. Including the nature and purpose of each bond you placed, when it was placed, and the full content of any prophecy or similar information that informed your decision. She held his gaze. Refusal to provide the statement triggers an immediate referral to the ICW, which will escalate the treaty violation to the international level. I understand, Dumbledore said. The British ministry will be formally notified this afternoon, she continued. I will be contacting Minister Fudge directly. Given the sensitivity of the situation and the British ministry's tendency toward internal resolution, I will be requesting an ICW liaison be present for all subsequent proceedings. She stood, which was also authoritative, the deliberate end of the portion of the meeting she was controlling. One more thing, Professor. Yes. Harry Potter's welfare and safety for the remainder of the tournament period, she said. Given the documented interference with his person, France is formally requesting that he be placed under supplemental protections for the duration. This is not a request that requires your agreement. It is a notification. Dumbledore looked at Harry. Harry, he said, and his voice was very quiet. I want you to know that everything I did was, I know, Harry said. He said it without heat, without forgiveness, without anything that wasn't simply accurate. You believed it was necessary. You were wrong. Those 2 things are both true. He held the old man's gaze. I'm not going to spend energy hating you, Professor. But I'm not going to pretend it was all right, either. It wasn't. Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly. No, he said. It wasn't. The afternoon moved fast. Dumbledore's statement took 3 hours, conducted in a conference room that Rousseau's legal advocate had set up with recording equipment and witness authentication charms. McGonagall sat in for the first hour and left. She did not explain why she left. Harry thought she probably needed to be alone. He was not present for the statement. He was in the corridor outside with Fleur, and the Echo Bond was a warm, steady presence, and neither of them spoke much. There was nothing to say that wasn't already understood between them. Hermione appeared at 2 o'clock with tea and an expression that meant she had news. The aura records came, she said, sitting between them and keeping her voice low. From Sirius's contact. Harry looked at her. The magical signature on those 4 bonds, she said. It matches a record in the Aura files. A file that's technically classified, but that Sirius's contact pulled anyway because he doesn't like Crouch and never has. She paused. Bartemius Crouch Jr. Fleur's breath was sharp. He's supposed to be dead, Harry said. He's supposed to be dead, Hermione confirmed. Died in Azkaban 4 years ago, officially. His father reported it. His mother, she stopped. His mother died around the same time he was supposed to have died. I think she switched with him. I think she died in Azkaban and he got out, and his father has been keeping him contained somewhere. And now he's in this school wearing Moody's face, Harry said. Running the tournament from the inside, Fleur said. Delivering me to Voldemort, Harry said. The corridor was cold and quiet. Somewhere in the castle above them, Dumbledore was giving a sworn statement about 40 years of careful management. Somewhere in the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, Barty Crouch Jr. was probably teaching a class or marking papers or doing whatever he'd been doing for 6 months in the flawless performance of a man who wasn't there. We need to tell Rousseau, Harry said. I know, Hermione said. But there's a complication. What? If we tell Rousseau, she'll move to apprehend him, Hermione said. And if he feels that coming, if he knows the net is closing, he might make a move before it closes. He'll go for me, Harry said. He'll try to get you to Voldemort by any means available, Hermione said. The tournament is the preferred method, but if the tournament is compromised in his view he might attempt something more direct. Let him try, Harry said quietly. Hermione looked at him. Harry, I'm not being reckless, he said. I'm being accurate. I know what I'm capable of now. I know the shape of my own magic. Barty Crouch Jr. is a skilled Death Eater and I'm 14 and that gap in experience is real, I'm not pretending it isn't. He looked at her steadily. But I'm not what he thinks I am. He's been operating on the assumption that I'm the suppressed version. He hasn't adjusted for the actual version. You've had 4 days of being the actual version, Hermione said. Yes, he said. And I've done more in those 4 days than I did in 4 years. Imagine what I'll be in 4 weeks. He paused. Tell Rousseau. Let her move. But tell her about the risk of him accelerating the plan, so she can adjust for it. Hermione looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up the Aura records and stood. Right, she said. I'll go in. She went. Harry leaned against the cold stone wall and looked at the ceiling. Fleur was beside him, shoulder almost touching his. The echo bond ran steady between them, a low warmth in the background of everything. You're not afraid of him, she said. Of Crouch? He thought about it. No. I know what he is. He's dangerous and he's committed and he has 6 months of planning behind him. Those are real factors. He paused. But the fear he installed was supposed to make me feel like any threat connected to Voldemort was beyond me. Like I was always already defeated. He turned his head to look at her. That was the point of the fear enhancer. Not to make me careful. To make me feel fundamentally unequal to my own life. She held his gaze. And now? Now I feel exactly as equal to my own life as I actually am, he said. Which is considerably more than I was led to believe. She was quiet for a moment. The echo bond moved, something acknowledging, something that was her own read on the truth of what he'd said. When this is done, she said, not if, when, and he noted that, what do you want? The question surprised him. Not its content, but the fact that someone had asked it, had stopped in the middle of everything and turned to him and asked what he wanted, not what the situation required, not what was strategically optimal, not what was expected. I want a year without anyone's hands on my choices, he said. I want to find out what I'm actually capable of, without a ceiling. I want to finish this tournament as myself. He paused. And I want Voldemort dealt with on my own terms. Another pause, shorter. What do you want? She looked slightly surprised that he'd asked back. Then she said, I want to stop being underestimated. Not by the obvious people, I've made peace with idiots thinking I'm decorative. I mean by the people who should know better. She paused. I want to be in the room when things happen. Not decorative, not peripheral. Actually in it. You're in it now, he said. Yes, she said. I am. Rousseau came out of the conference room at 4:30 and found Harry waiting. Bartemius Crouch Jr., Harry said, before she could speak. She stopped. You have the identification. Hermione gave you the file. She did. Yes. Rousseau looked at him. The British ministry is going to be very uncomfortable with this. Good, Harry said. They should be. Crouch Sr. is on the Tournament Oversight Committee, she said. He submitted the paperwork that established Moody as a Hogwarts staff member for this year. He will claim ignorance. He might be telling the truth, Harry said. His son escaped Azkaban without his help, probably. He's been containing him, his house, under some kind of binding. But someone released him for this. He paused. Someone who knew about the tournament plan. Who needed a trusted internal operative. Voldemort, Rousseau said. Voldemort communicating through Peter Pettigrew, who is also supposed to be dead, Harry said. I know. It's a long chain of officially dead people. British magical justice has been operating on some optimistic assumptions. Rousseau looked at him with the same recalibration expression as the morning. She had stopped, he noticed, speaking to him in the tone adults used for 14-year-olds. She was speaking to him the way she'd spoken to Beaumont and to her legal advocate, as someone in the room. He appreciated this without making anything of it. I want to apprehend Crouch Jr. today, she said. Before end of day. I thought you would, he said. I've been thinking about how. Tell me. He's been taking polyjuice every hour. He needs the supply on him or nearby. His office. Harry had spent time thinking about this, had gone over it from multiple angles, and the thinking felt good, efficient and clear, the way thinking felt when it wasn't running through 44 filters. The problem is if he knows someone is coming for him. He needs 1 hour of warning, maximum. If he knows more than an hour in advance that the net is closing, he'll either run or he'll make a move on me. So we give him no warning, Rousseau said. Beaumont and 2 of your cursebreakers, with McGonagall and 1 Auror from the British side for jurisdictional cover, Harry said. You don't need more than that if you move fast and you've got the element of surprise. And Dumbledore? Keep him in his office. He won't interfere actively. He knows the situation is past that point. Harry paused. He also genuinely doesn't know about Crouch. Or I believe he doesn't. He's been suspecting something was wrong with Moody for months but he hasn't acted on it, which is its own problem. But he's not protecting Crouch deliberately. Rousseau nodded. And you? I'll be elsewhere, Harry said. Visibly elsewhere. The Beauxbatons common area. Somewhere Crouch can confirm I'm not moving. He paused. I don't want to be in his eye line when it happens. I want the apprehension clean. You're very good at this, Rousseau said. Not flattery. An observation. I've had 3 days to think about nothing else, he said. She looked at him for another moment. Then, the formal declaration. The state of magical war against persons responsible for the violation of tournament charter, I am issuing it this evening. You should understand what that means. It means France is formally committed to pursuing accountability through international legal channels regardless of British political resistance, Harry said. It triggers ICW monitoring of the case and removes it from British internal jurisdiction. It means Fudge can't bury it. He paused. It also means there will be people in the British ministry who will treat it as an act of aggression and respond accordingly. Yes, she said. Are you comfortable with that? He thought about the word comfortable. He thought about it briefly and accurately and dismissed it. It's necessary, he said. Whether I'm comfortable with it is beside the point. She almost smiled. I am going to find Beaumont, she said. We move in 2 hours. She walked away down the corridor, her heels sharp on the stone, a woman who had made a decision and was through with deliberating. Harry watched her go. He sent his magic out, faintly, the way he'd been learning to do, a low broadcast, not an attack, not a demand, just presence. The school responded faintly in all directions. He could feel Fleur 2 floors up in the Beauxbatons common area. He could feel Hermione in the library. He could feel, in the ground floor at the far end of the castle, the particular false quality of Crouch's Moody's magical signature. The polyjuice seemed visible to his unfiltered perception like a crack in glass. 2 hours. He was in the Beauxbatons common area when it happened. He didn't hear anything. The castle was large and the data office was on the other side of it. But at 6:41, the false Moody signature in his magical awareness went from its ongoing faint pulse to a sudden bright spike, alarm, motion, a surge of active magic, and then, 40 seconds later, nothing. The signature flattened to the unconscious baseline of a bound person. Beaumont had moved fast. The echo bond pulsed, Fleur sitting across from him, watching his face. Done, she said quietly. Done, he said. Around them, Beauxbatons students were studying and talking in the warm common area of their carriage, unaware that anything had happened. Roger Davies was playing Exploding Snap with 2 friends near the window. A third year was crying quietly about something to her friend, who was rubbing her back. The ordinary texture of a school evening, undisturbed. Harry looked at his hands on the table in front of him and thought about Barty Crouch Jr. lying bound in Moody's office, the polyjuice wearing off now without its hourly renewal, Moody's face dissolving away to reveal whoever was underneath it. He thought about 6 months of careful planning coming apart because Fleur Delacour had looked at the Yule Ball with Veela eyes and seen something that wasn't supposed to be visible. He thought about all the things that had happened in 4 days. Rousseau is issuing the declaration tonight, he said. Fleur looked at him. I know. It's going to be loud, he said. In the morning, when it becomes public. The British ministry is going to be furious. Fudge is going to call it overreach. There will be articles in the Prophet. Yes, she said. People in this school are going to have a lot of opinions about it, he said. Some of them are going to direct those opinions at you. She looked at him with the expression of someone who had been the subject of people's opinions since she was 12 and had long since stopped letting it dictate her choices. I am aware, she said. I know you are, he said. I'm noting it. Not as a warning. He stopped, finding the right word. As an acknowledgement. You did something very large 4 days ago and you've been doing very large things every day since and I don't want it to go unsaid. She was quiet for a moment. The echo bond ran between them, warmer than its usual background presence. You would have found it eventually, she said. The bonds. Something would have triggered your magic past the suppression eventually. Maybe, he said. But you found it first. And it cost you something and you haven't stopped since. He looked at her directly. So. Thank you. Properly. She met his eyes. You're welcome, she said. Properly. The door of the carriage opened and Hermione came in fast, her hair damp from the sleet outside, her face carrying the specific expression of someone who had been in motion for 6 hours and was running on focus and tea. He's in custody, she said, dropping into the chair beside Harry. The real Moody, the actual Moody, was in a trunk in the data office. He's alive. He's been there since September. Beaumont has him and the French healers are with him now. She put a folder on the table. And Fudge has been notified. The British Ministry owl arrived 20 minutes ago. She paused. He's coming tomorrow. Good, Harry said. He's bringing 3 Aurors and a legal team, Hermione said. Also good, Harry said. Let him. Hermione looked at him with the slightly exasperated affection of someone who has known a person their whole life and is watching them become a new version of themselves that is better in every measurable way but still slightly infuriating. You're not even slightly concerned about Fudge. Cornelius Fudge, Harry said, has documentation of a treaty violation on one side and a living Death Eater in custody on the other, and both of those things are going to be true when he arrives regardless of what he wants them to be. He picked up his tea, which had gone cold. He can be concerned enough for both of us. Outside the carriage windows, the sleet had turned to proper snow. It came down in the dark in long slow lines, covering the Hogwarts grounds in white, and somewhere in the castle Apollon Rousseau was drafting a declaration that would be filed with the International Confederation of Wizards before midnight. France was declaring it formally. What had been done to Harry Potter was a violation. A documented, witnessed, internationally recorded violation. There were names attached to it now, Dumbledore's name on 38 anchor points and Barty Crouch Jr.'s name on 4 more, and the names couldn't be taken back. The snow kept coming. Harry thought about 6 weeks to the second task. He thought about his magic, banked and vast and entirely his own, running through him with the easy naturalness of something that had always been this size. He thought, let them all come. He thought, I'm ready. Chapter 5, The Second Task, Unbound. The 6 weeks between Rousseau's declaration and February 24th were not quiet weeks. Fudge arrived the morning after the declaration with 3 Aurors, a legal team, and the expression of a man who had been woken at midnight by the worst news of his political career and had not slept since. He spent 4 hours in Dumbledore's office, 2 hours with Rousseau's legal advocate, and approximately 40 minutes in a room with Barty Crouch Jr., who had, by that point, been positively identified, had the polyjuice entirely cleared from his system, and was sitting in conjured magical restraints looking at the wall with the focused vacancy of someone who had made their peace with the fact that the plan was finished. The Crouch Jr. problem resolved itself faster than anyone expected, primarily because the real Moody, recovered enough to be furious after 3 days of French healing attention, provided a comprehensive testimony that left no procedural gaps. Fudge tried twice to suggest that the impersonation might have been a security failure rather than an active conspiracy, and both times Rousseau's legal advocate produced documentation that closed the argument before it could open. The Daily Prophet ran the story on day 3. The headline was, Death Eater poses as Hogwarts professor, boy who lived targeted. Rita Skeeter had gotten there first, which surprised nobody, and her version was sensational and approximately 60% accurate, which was better than her usual average. The part she missed entirely was the bond documentation, which had been filed with the ICW under a confidentiality order at Rousseau's specific instruction. Not to protect Dumbledore, the minister had been entirely clear on that, but because releasing it publicly before the formal proceedings were complete would allow the British ministry to frame it as a French attack on British institutions rather than a documented violation of international law. Dumbledore remained as headmaster. This was, Harry understood, the most politically complex outcome, because the simplest outcome, his immediate removal, would have triggered a crisis in the British magical education system that Rousseau had decided was not worth the collateral damage. The formal proceedings against him were real and ongoing. He would face them. But in the interim, he was in his office and in his castle and considerably less present in Harry's daily life than he had previously been. He had tried once more to speak to Harry privately, a week after the declaration. Harry had listened, standing in the corridor outside the Great Hall, for approximately 4 minutes. Dumbledore had said the things Harry had expected him to say: regret, necessity, the prophecy framing, the weight of difficult decisions. He had said them with genuine feeling, which Harry believed was real, and with the underlying certainty of a man who still, at some level, believed he had done the right thing for the wrong reasons or the wrong thing for the right reasons and couldn't quite work out which. Harry had said, I understand you. I don't forgive you yet. Maybe eventually. Dumbledore had nodded. His eyes had been very old. Harry had gone to his training session. The training was the thing that marked the 6 weeks. He trained every morning before breakfast on the east lawn, in the snow and then the cold grey pre-spring light as February moved toward its end. Fleur joined him 4 days a week. Hermione joined when her schedule allowed and spent her time sitting on a stone with 6 books open simultaneously, shouting corrections at intervals that were occasionally useful and occasionally purely Hermione. Sirius, who had established himself in a cave on a hillside 3 miles from Hogsmeade and communicated primarily by enchanted two-way mirror, contributed tactical advice and commentary that was very helpful when it was focused and very chaotic when it wasn't. The training was not a montage. It was work, specific, incremental, occasionally humbling work. His wandless magic was naturally strong but raw, and he spent 2 weeks on precision before he touched anything else, because Fleur had said in her grandmother's exact words that power without precision was a hammer when you needed a scalpel, and he had taken this to heart. By the end of the first week he could manage 20 distinct wandless spells with reliable accuracy. By the end of the 3rd week that number was 40. By the time February 24th arrived the number was closer to 60 and he had stopped finding the wandless component interesting as its own feature. It was just how his magic worked, the one an optional refinement rather than a necessary channel. He was not reckless about it. He was, if anything, more careful with his magic now than before the bonds broke, because now he could feel its actual edges and knew what it could do, and that knowledge produced not arrogance but respect for it, the way a person who understands a powerful tool is more careful with it than one who doesn't. The water-breathing problem for the second task was solved in the 2nd week. Not by gillyweed, not by the bubblehead charm, both of which he could manage, but by something Fleur's grandmother had written in a letter that arrived in the 3rd week of January, addressed to both of them, in Solange Delacour's spidery hand. The letter was primarily about the echo bond. It was also about an aspect of Veela-adjacent magical theory that Solange described as sympathetic elemental affinity, the capacity of a person with strongly bonded magical partners to borrow, temporarily, the elemental strengths of those partners. Veela had natural water affinity. Fleur had natural water affinity. The echo bond, Solange wrote, was not one-directional. Harry had read this 3 times and then looked at Fleur. "Can I ask you to try something?" "Probably," she said. They had spent an afternoon by the lake's edge in the cold. What they worked out, slowly and experimentally, was that Harry could extend his awareness through the echo bond and borrow something, not power, exactly, but orientation. The way certain creatures navigated by the Earth's field, he could, with Fleur's conscious participation, navigate water as a native element rather than a hostile one. No charm required. No physical modification. Just the bond, and his magic following the path it opened. The first time he walked into the lake water to his waist in January cold and felt it shift from threat to medium, Fleur said from the bank, "Yes. That's it." He'd stayed under for 12 minutes on that first attempt. By February 24th he could manage 40. The hostage problem was trickier. The clue in the golden egg, a wailing, distorted sound that resolved, when played underwater, to a song about taking what you'd miss most, had told him someone was being held under the lake. In the original shape of the tournament, before everything changed, he would have been driven by the fear enhancer to save the hostage at any cost, moving in the direction Crouch had pointed him. Now, with the tournament restructured and Crouch in custody, the task was simply the task, an athletic competition with real stakes. The rules said the champions had an hour. The rules said hostages would not be permanently harmed. He wasn't worried about the hostage. He was worried about who the hostage was. He found out 3 days before the task when Hermione didn't come down to breakfast and McGonagall appeared in the Great Hall with a look that answered the question without requiring words. He went to find Fleur. She was at the Beauxbatons table, very still. Her Veela perception would have already read the shift in his magical state as he came through the door. "Gabrielle," she said, before he sat down. "Hermione," he said. They looked at each other. The echo bond carried something that didn't need to be put into words, a shared understanding of stakes, and underneath it, from her side, something fiercer and more personal than stakes. "I'll get them both out," he said. "I know," she said. That's not reassurance, he said. That's a statement of intent. I know that too, she said. Harry. Gabrielle is 8 years old. I know. He held her gaze. She will come out of that lake. February 24th arrived cold and pale, the lake reflecting a sky that hadn't decided yet whether it wanted to clear. The champion's tent at the lake's edge smelled of canvas and damp and nerves. Cedric Diggory was in the far corner reviewing notes with the focused calm of a person who prepared for everything. Victor Crumb was standing with his arms folded, staring at nothing with the particular blankness of an athlete in the pre-performance state of deliberate emptiness. Fleur was not present, she was in the Beaux Batons section of the viewing stands, which she had been assigned by the restructured tournament committee, which had reorganized the champions' arrangements following the Crouch exposure. This had caused an argument. Harry had made the argument to Bagman directly, in the same clear, undecorated way he now made most arguments, which was by identifying the relevant rule and applying it. Fleur was a champion. Champions were entitled to pre-task preparation space. The tent was the pre-task preparation space. The restructured committee's decision to assign her to the stands instead was not supported by tournament charter and he wanted it revisited. Bagman had sputtered. Harry had waited. The committee had, eventually, revised the decision, and Fleur had come to the tent, only to tell Harry she preferred the stands because she wanted the sight lines. She had said this in a tone that made absolutely clear she was aware he'd gone to bat for her and that the awareness would be addressed later. He had been in the tent for 20 minutes when Bagman came in with the task briefing. The Black Lake. 60 minutes. Each champion's most precious thing held at the bottom. Mere people as guides and potential obstacles. Surface at the appointed time or forfeit points. No magical interference from outside the lake once the task began. Harry stood at the lake's edge at 9:58, his wand in his pocket where he didn't plan to need it, his feet at the water's edge, feeling the cold air come off the surface. 2 minutes. He had 44 empty spaces in his magical body and a magic that was, he had discovered over 6 weeks, considerably more than he'd ever been permitted to understand. He had 60 people he actually liked watching from the stands and one person whose awareness ran warmly in the background of his own. He had the specific settled quality of someone who has prepared for something and knows it. Bagman raised his wand. The cannon fired. Harry walked into the lake. The cold hit first, then the echo bond engaged, and the water shifted. It was like the first time in January, except deeper, he was fully submerged, moving fast, and the lake's cold was present but not hostile, more like a medium than an obstacle, the way air was a medium. He moved through it without the bubblehead charm and without gillyweed, his breathing adapted through the borrowed elemental affinity, and the dark water was dark in the way that dark was just dark and not threatening. He moved quickly. He'd spent time over 6 weeks learning the lake, its geography, its currents, the location of the Mere People settlement that Fleur's grandmother had included in one of her letters, drawn from old Hogwarts survey records dating back to the 1600s. He had a map in his head. He used it. The Grindylows were first. A cluster of them, spindly-fingered, coming out of the weed beds in the organized harassment pattern he'd read about in a book Hermione had found. He didn't slow down. His magic broadcast outward in a pulse that was not aggressive, he wasn't attacking them, but was absolutely, clearly the magical equivalent of don't. The Grindylows recoiled. The pulse hadn't been a spell. It had been his actual magic, unfiltered, speaking the language of the lake in the way that large predators communicated with smaller ones. He moved through where they'd been and kept going. The Mere People village was 20 minutes in. The tunnel of stone and weed that opened into it was marked, in the real geography, by a current shift he'd learned to feel in the January sessions. He moved through it and came out into the lit space of the village, cold fire, glowing rock, the watching faces of the Mere People who regarded him with the flat, predatory interest of creatures that were intelligent and territorial and evaluating him. He didn't slow down here either. He had spent time, in the second week, researching Mermish. Not learning it, that was years of work, but understanding its basic acoustic structure, which Hermione had helped him with and which had given him 3 phrases that were phonetically possible in underwater conditions. He used them now, not perfectly but accurately enough, and the reaction in the Mere People cluster was interesting, a visible shift from predatory interest to something more complicated, the recognition of someone who had bothered to learn 3 words of your language carrying disproportionate social weight in most intelligent cultures. The eldest merperson pointed left. He went left. The hostages were at the center of the village, held in a ring of weed. Hermione and Gabrielle, both in the magical sleep of the task's enchantment, both physically fine, suspended upright in the cold water. 2 others he recognized as Ron Weasley and Victor Crumb's date from the ball. He was there in 22 minutes. Well inside the hour. He cut Hermione's weed with a sharp, focused magical edge, wandless, clean, no excess. Then he moved to Gabrielle and stopped. Not because anything was wrong. Because a merperson was blocking his path. It was one of the younger ones, smaller, its gray-green face arranged in the flat expression of a guard following instructions. Harry looked at it. The task rules were clear, each champion was meant to take their own hostage. The rules did not explicitly prohibit taking an additional one, but the operational culture of the task assumed each champion would surface with 1 person. He looked at the guard. He looked at Gabrielle. He looked at the other 2 hostages, Ron and the other student, whose champion, if Crumb arrived in time, would retrieve them. He did not know if Crumb was going to arrive in time. He did not know what was happening with Fleur. The echo bond was present and steady, which told him Fleur was well, but it didn't tell him how the task was going for her. She had her own problems. Fleur's water affinity was strong but the lake was vast and the Mere People were territorial, and the bond told him she was functional but not her specific position. He looked at the guard merperson, said the third of his 3 phrases, which was approximately I take 2, I return for the others and was probably grammatically wrong in 3 ways, and then reached past the guard and cut Gabrielle's weed. The guard let him. He wasn't sure if that was the phrase or the magic or the fact that in 22 minutes he had moved through the lake without attacking anything and spoken to the elders and arrived looking like someone who knew what they were doing. Possibly all 3. He came up with both of them 34 minutes into the task. The surface of the lake broke around them in a rush of cold air and noise, the crowd, the officials at the judges' platform, Bagman's magically amplified voice somewhere above saying something about the first champion to surface. Hermione's enchantment was broken by the air and she sputtered and gasped and grabbed his arm. Gabrielle remained asleep until the official countercharm, but she was breathing and her color was right and she was in one piece. He swam them both to the bank. Fleur was there before he'd fully stood up on solid ground, and she came forward without running but with the specific purposeful stride that covered ground fast, and she took Gabrielle from him without words and held her, and the 8-year-old woke up sputtering into her sister's shoulder. Harry stood dripping on the bank and watched the reunion and felt the echo bond run very warm. Fleur looked up at him over Gabrielle's head. He nodded. She held his gaze for a moment with something in her face that was large and real and she would address properly later. Then she looked back at her sister. Cedric surfaced 14 minutes after Harry with his hostage. Crumb came up 3 minutes later, partially transfigured, shark head, he'd gone with the partial shark transfiguration, with his companion. He came up with Ron at the same time, which meant he'd managed both without planning to, and Harry noted this as consistent with Crumb being a genuinely talented wizard rather than someone who got by on Quidditch fame. Fleur did not surface. 40 minutes in, 50 minutes in. The crowd was getting anxious in the specific way crowds got anxious when something had been fine and was now possibly not fine. Harry was already moving toward the water. McGonagall appeared at his elbow. Harry, the task rules are silent on whether a champion who has already surfaced can re-enter the lake, Harry said. He was already at the water's edge. I've checked. He went in. The echo bond pointed direction like a compass. 20 meters west of the main village, in a run of weed that hadn't been in his prepared map, a blind spot, unfamiliar territory, and there was something wrong in the magic of the area, a disruption he recognized as the signature of Grindylow interference at scale. Not the small harassment cluster from earlier. A mob. He found Fleur at the center of them. She was conscious and fighting. He felt that first through the bond, the spike of active magic that meant she was not in the slack helplessness of the overwhelmed but was choosing her ground and fighting it. But there were a lot of Grindylows. Dozens of them, coordinated in a way that suggested a specific territorial response to someone disrupting the wheat beds near their breeding ground, which was exactly the kind of local geography his map hadn't included. He pushed. Not a targeted spell. The same pulse he'd used on the earlier cluster, but larger, a broadcast of genuine magical presence, unfiltered, the full uncompressed weight of it radiating outward from his position in all directions. The lake felt it. The Grindylows felt it. They scattered in a single, simultaneous, unanimous decision to be elsewhere. Fleur hovered in the sudden clear water with her long hair wild around her and her wand in her hand and her Veela nature fully active, the water-distorted glow of it visible even here, even in the cold dark, and she looked at him with an expression that was entirely composed and also, underneath, enormously relieved. He swam to her. She took the arm he offered and they went up together. They broke the surface with 56 minutes elapsed on the task clock. The crowd was loud. He didn't pay attention to the crowd. He was focused on getting her to the bank, which she did under her own power but didn't object to him being beside her for. On the bank, Gabrielle, who had been awake for 20 minutes and had apparently spent those minutes being briefed by the elder sister on what was happening, launched herself at Harry with the specific uncalibrated physical affection of 8-year-olds who have decided they like someone. He caught her. She said something rapid in French against his shoulder. She says you kept your promise, Fleur said, from 2 feet away, wringing water from her hair with one hand. She also says you're very tall for 14. She's very tall for 8, he said. Gabrielle pulled back and looked at him with Fleur's eyes in a smaller, rounder face, and said, in very careful English, thank you. You're welcome, he said. The scores were announced 40 minutes later on the judges' platform, and they went, Harry Potter, 50 points. Cedric Diggory, 47. Victor Crumb, 40. Fleur Delacour, 35, with a deduction for requiring assistance. The deduction was procedurally correct. It was also, as Harry said to Bagman in the specific tone he now used when identifying something inaccurate, worth examining given that the Grindylow interference had been an uncharted hazard and the tournament rules on uncharted hazards were explicit. Bagman looked at his notes. Then at Harry. Then at his notes. 40 points, he said, with the specific hastiness of someone avoiding a longer argument. Revised. 40 points for Mademoiselle Delacour. Fleur did not thank Bagman. She looked at Harry briefly, and the look said everything the scores didn't. It was the reaction afterward that nobody had prepared for. Not from the students were the students, loud and opinionated and cycling through the story rapidly as it passed through the gossip network. What Harry hadn't accounted for was the specific impact of watching him move through that lake on the people who'd been watching. Crumb found him outside the champion's tent. He was a large person and he used his size with the careful awareness of someone who knew it made people nervous and had decided not to let it do that when they didn't want it to. He stopped in front of Harry and said, in his accented English, "What you did in the lake." The pulse. What was that? My magic, Harry said. Not a spell. No. Crumb looked at him for a long moment with the analytical intensity of a professional athlete identifying something genuinely new. Dumbledore will not tell me what it is. McGonagall will not tell me what it is. Your textbooks do not, he stopped. You know what you're doing. I'm learning, Harry said. Which was true. You are 14, Crumb said. Not with dismissal. With the specific tone of someone revising an assessment. Yes, Harry said. You're 18. Crumb almost smiled. Duh, he said. But I have been trained since 12. You have not. I've been trained for 6 weeks, Harry said. By who? Myself, mostly. Harry paused. And Fleur? Crumb looked across the bank to where Fleur was sitting with Gabrielle, the two of them wrapped in towels, Gabrielle eating something and talking with the relentless energy of a child who had had an adventure and wanted to discuss every detail. Delacour, Crumb said. She is not what people say she is. No, Harry agreed. She's more. Crumb nodded. He looked back at Harry. The third task, he said. The maze. I do not know what is in it, but I know what it was designed to do. He met Harry's eyes. Be careful. I will be, Harry said. Are you? A pause. I am trying, Crumb said, which was an honest answer, and Harry respected it as such. Crumb walked away. Harry stood on the bank with the cold February air drying his clothes and thought about the maze and about what it was designed to do. Crouch was in custody. The port key that had been the maze's endpoint, a specific trophy rigged to transport to Little Hangleton, had been found and disabled by Beaumont's team in the second week of February, because when you put a Death Eater in custody and he's been polyjuiced and desperate and knows the game is over, he tells you things in exchange for considerations. Crouch Jr. had told them about the port key. He had not told them whether Voldemort had a backup plan. Harry had been thinking about this for 3 weeks. The backup plan problem. Voldemort was not stupid, was, in fact, intelligent and patient and had contingencies for contingencies. The port key was the primary method. What was the secondary? He didn't have an answer yet. He was working on it. He found Sirius's mirror in his pocket, he'd been carrying it since January, and stepped behind the tent for 30 seconds of privacy. I saw the lake from the hill, Sirius said, the moment his face appeared in the mirror. He looked wild-eyed and proud and slightly damp himself, which Harry chose not to examine. What the bloody hell was that pulse thing? That wasn't in any book I've ever read. It was just my magic, Harry said. Harry. When you're underwater and you pulse your raw magic and 100 Grindylows simultaneously decide they'd rather be on the other side of the lake, that's not just your magic. That's a different category of thing. I'll look into the category, Harry said. Are you all right on the hill? Fed and warm and watched the whole task. Yes. Sirius's face was serious under the pride. The portkey's gone. But Crouch only told you what he knew was already compromised. He's Death Eater trained. He held something back. I know, Harry said. The graveyard in Little Hangleton, Sirius said. That's where Voldemort is. Has been all year. Pettigrew with him. He paused. I want to go there. No, Harry said immediately. Harry, if you go there as a fugitive wanted by the British Ministry and something goes wrong, you have no legal protection, no backup, and you're a liability, Harry said. You're more useful to me free and close by than dead or recaptured. He paused. When the time comes to deal with Voldemort, I will deal with him. With people who have the right preparation and the right legal standing. You're 14, Sirius said. Sirius. I know, I watched the lake, I'm revising, I'm just, he stopped. I spent 12 years unable to protect you. It's a difficult habit to, I know, Harry said, and he meant it, and the echo bond pulsed very gently in the background, which was Fleur having the general sense that something warm and complicated was happening and choosing not to intrude on it. You'll have your chance. Just not yet. Sirius took a breath. All right, he said. All right. A pause. You're going to write to me about the maze. Every detail I have. Good. Another pause. Your mother would have been, he stopped again. She would have loved this version of you. Harry held the mirror for a moment. I think I would have loved her too, he said. This version of me. He put the mirror away and went back around the tent. Fudge was waiting for him. He was standing with 2 Aurors and his legal team, and he had the specific expression of a man who had been avoiding a conversation and had run out of road. He'd been doing this since the Declaration, hovering at the procedural edges of everything, making noise about British sovereignty and French overreach in the Prophet, trying to reframe the Crouch situation as an isolated incident rather than a symptom of a larger failure. He had been, in Hermione's precise assessment, doing everything except confronting the actual problem. "Mr. Potter," Fudge said. "A word." Harry looked at his watch. "A short one. I have a debrief with Madame Beaumont at 3. Fudge's jaw tightened slightly at the casual reference to the French cursebreaker. This situation that Minister Rousseau has created, the documented treaty violation. Harry said. Yes, the formal investigation has implications for British magical institutions that I don't think you fully, I think I fully understand them, Harry said. He was not rude. He was just completely direct, which had somewhat the same effect on Fudge. Dumbledore placed 42 compulsion bonds on me over 14 years. A Death Eater spent 6 months impersonating a Ministry Auror and attempting to deliver me to Voldemort. Both of those things are documented, witnessed, and filed with the ICW. The implications for British institutions come from the acts, not from France's decision to enforce the law about them. He paused. Is there something specific you wanted to address? Fudge was red. He had the specific redness of a man whose blood pressure was carrying his emotions because his face was trying not to. The declaration of war is a formal legal term for a specific treaty enforcement action, not a declaration of military hostilities, Harry said. Hermione explained this to me in the second week. If you'd like the specific provision references, I can get them for you. I don't need. Fudge stopped. He looked at Harry with the expression of someone confronting the fact that the 14-year-old in front of him had read more of the relevant law than he had. What do you want? He said, and the question was raw enough that it was almost honest. Harry thought about this for a moment. I want the proceedings against Dumbledore to complete properly, he said. I want Voldemort's return addressed as the real and active threat it is rather than denied for political convenience. I want Sirius Black's case reopened on the basis of new evidence from Crouch Jr.'s testimony. Sirius did not commit the crimes he was imprisoned for and Crouch knows it. He paused. That's the list. Fudge looked at him. The Sirius Black case is, he began. Is what? Harry said. Fudge said nothing. The evidence exists, Harry said. You have Crouch in custody and Crouch Jr.'s testimony about Peter Pettigrew, who is the actual secret keeper and the actual killer of those 12 people. All you have to do is convene a proper hearing. He held Fudge's gaze. Sirius Black spent 12 years in Azkaban for something he didn't do because nobody gave him a trial. That is not something I'm willing to drop off the list. Fudge looked away first. I'll see what can be done, he said, which was not a yes and was not a no and was, from Fudge, about as good as it got in a single conversation. Thank you, Minister, Harry said, and walked toward Beaumont's table. The debrief with Beaumont was efficient and productive. She had been at the lake for the task, had watched the pulse from the bank, and had 3 questions about it that she asked with the specific technical curiosity of a professional encountering something outside her reference frame. He answered them as accurately as he could, which was imperfectly, because he still didn't have a complete theoretical framework for what he was doing, only the practical experience of doing it. Your magic is accessing something old, Beaumont said, making notes in a narrow notebook. The pulse, what you're describing is not in the contemporary literature. But there are older texts, pre-standardization, that describe something adjacent. I'll send them. Please, he said. She looked up. The maze, she said. The port key is disabled. But we have been operating on the assumption that Crouch told us the complete plan. I don't think he did, Harry said. Nor do I, Beaumont said. She set her pen down. The port key was the elegant solution. Voldemort's plans tend to have elegant solutions with brutal backups. The backup for the port key failure is almost certainly direct action during the maze, a contact object, a second port key we haven't found, or a person. Another operative, Harry said. Crouch Jr. was running alone, as far as we can determine. But if Pettigrew has been in communication with Hogwarts, through the Owl Post, through a student or staff member, Wormtail's a rat, Harry said, and the flatness of it was everything. Literally. He spent 3 years in this school as Ron's pet. He knows every inch of it. He stopped. He could come back. Not in his human form, he's known now, his face is in every magical paper, but as a rat, through the grounds. Beaumont looked at him. I'm not the backup target, Harry said, working it out as he spoke. The maze is still the delivery mechanism. The maze is enclosed and monitored and the port key is gone, but, he stopped. The maze is planted by the judges. The obstacles are set ahead of time. What if the maze itself has been modified? Not by Crouch, by Pettigrew. Working alone, at night, in rat form, over weeks. Modifying the maze to include a second transport point, Beaumont said. Or simply to steer me toward a position where Voldemort can act directly, Harry said. He's a powerful enough legilimens. If I'm in the right place, with no warning, and he's close, we need to sweep the maze, Beaumont said. She was already standing. Today. Before anything else. I can help, Harry said. I know, she said. That's why I'm telling you. They swept the maze that afternoon, Harry and Beaumont and 2 of the French cursebreakers, and they found 3 things that shouldn't have been there, 2 modified obstacles and 1 smooth stone in the maze's eastern corridor that was cold in the specific way of a recently constructed port key anchor. They disabled all 3. Pettigrew had been there. The magical residue on the stone was consistent with his signature in Crouch Jr.'s testimony, rat form and desperate and still loyal. Still carrying out a plan that was already broken, because that was what absolute loyalty to a cause looked like when the cause was failing. You kept working the problem. Harry looked at the disabled anchor and thought about Voldemort in Little Hangleton with a rudimentary body and a servant who kept trying and a plan that kept unraveling. He thought about the 3rd task in June and what it was now, not a death trap, not a delivery mechanism, just a competition. A genuinely difficult magical competition in a tournament that had started as something corrupt and was now, stripped of its manipulation, just the thing it claimed to be. He thought, June. He thought, I'll be ready. He thought, and this surprised him slightly with its clarity, I'm ready now. That evening, on the east lawn in the dark, the castle's windows yellow behind them and the lake black and still, Harry and Fleur stood in the cold. He had come here from the maze sweep without planning to. She had come here from the Beauxbatons carriage without planning to. The Echo Bond had done the navigating. Gabrielle is asleep, Fleur said. She made me promise she could come to the 3rd task. She can sit with me in the champion section, Harry said. Fleur looked at him. You know the 3rd task is no longer dangerous. The maze is still going to be difficult, he said. There are legitimate obstacles. Creatures, spells, puzzles. It'll be a real test. But not a death trap. Not a death trap, he agreed. They stood in the cold for a moment. Rousseau is going home next week, Fleur said. She says the investigation is at the procedural stage and the advocates can manage it from here. She'll return for the ICW hearings. A pause. She said something to me before the task today. What? She said, Fleur paused, choosing the translation carefully. She said, you were right to break it. Whatever it cost, you were right. And then she said, your grandmother would be insufferably proud. Harry looked at her sideways. Are you insufferably proud? I'm insufferable in general, she said. The pride is just one component. He laughed. It was the kind of laugh that came from genuine amusement, short and unself-conscious, and she looked at it with the slightly surprised expression she'd worn the first time he'd made her laugh, which was the expression of someone who had categorized something one way and is revising. The echo bond ran warm between them in the dark. "When this is all finished," she said, and she said it in French, which she sometimes did when she was saying something real, "and the proceedings are done and the tournament is done and whatever comes with Voldemort is done, what do you do?" "I don't know yet," he said, also in French, which was still slightly rough at the edges but was getting better. "I think that's the point. For the first time I don't know, and it's because the answer is genuinely open." He paused. "That's what 44 empty spaces feel like, eventually. Not loss. Just, room." She was quiet for a moment. "Room," she said. "Yes." The lake was black and still and enormous. Somewhere out there in the dark, past the grounds and past the village and past the hills, Voldemort was in a graveyard with a servant who kept trying and a plan that kept breaking and the specific, absolute conviction of a person who had never seriously considered that the object they were trying to break might be a person who could break back. June was coming. Harry Potter stood on the east lawn of Hogwarts in the dark, 14 years old and unfiltered and entirely himself, and he was not afraid of what June would bring. He was, if anything, ready. Chapter 6. What comes after war? June arrived the way summers arrive at Hogwarts, slowly and then all at once, the cold giving up in stages until the grounds were green and warm and the lake reflected actual sunlight rather than the memory of it. The third task was scheduled for the 24th. The 4 months between the second task and the third were the longest and shortest 4 months Harry had ever lived, depending on which angle you looked at them from. Long because the formal proceedings moved at the speed of institutional machinery, which was deliberate and grinding and occasionally maddening. Short because everything else moved fast, the preparation, the investigation, the specific daily texture of being himself without interference, which turned out to be considerably more engaging than the filtered version. The Dumbledore hearings were the grinding part. They happened in March and April, conducted in a conference room in Hogsmeade that had been declared neutral territory by the ICW Observer, attended by Rousseau's legal advocates, British ministry representatives, Dumbledore himself with his own counsel, and a rotating cast of witnesses. Harry gave testimony in the second week of March. He sat across a table from Dumbledore's counsel, a sharp-faced witch named Alderton who had made a 40-year career out of making difficult things procedurally complicated, and answered questions for 3 hours. Alderton tried several approaches. The protective intent argument, which Harry had prepared for. The extraordinary circumstances argument, which Hermione had prepared him for. And finally, most interestingly, the willful cooperation of the subject argument, which suggested that Harry's acceptance of Dumbledore's guidance over the years constituted implicit consent to the guidance structures. Harry had looked at Alderton across the table and said, "A person cannot consent to something they don't know is happening. The argument requires that I understood what was being done to me and accepted it. The documentation shows that the bonds were specifically designed to prevent that understanding. The argument is circular." Alderton moved on. The formal finding took until late April. It was not a criminal conviction. The ICW had determined that pursuing criminal proceedings under British law, which would fall to the British Wisengamot, created an irresolvable conflict of interest. The finding was a formal treaty violation, documented, internationally registered, permanently on record. Dumbledore was removed from the ICW Supreme Mugwump position, effective immediately. His position at Hogwarts was the subject of a separate British ministry review that was, characteristically, still ongoing in June. He remained as headmaster. He was present and capable and, as far as Harry could observe, genuinely changed in some way that was hard to name, not broken, not diminished, but quieter. The ambient projection of warmth and trustworthiness had stopped. What was left was a very old, very intelligent man who had made a catastrophic error over a very long time and was living in the knowledge of it without being able to undo it. Harry had one more conversation with him, in April, on the stone steps outside the castle on a grey afternoon. Dumbledore had said, "The prophecy, you should know it in full. You've earned that." "Tell me," Harry said. He told him. The full text, unedited, with the specific gravity of someone handing over something they'd been carrying alone for too long. Harry listened. He thought about it. He said, so it was always going to be me. Yes, Dumbledore said. That didn't require the bonds, Harry said. If the prophecy was true, I was always going to be the one who faced him. You didn't need to manage me toward it. I was already pointed at it. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. No, he said finally. I suppose I didn't. It was the most honest thing Harry had ever heard him say. Sirius's hearing was in May. It convened on the 14th, in the Wisingamot chambers, with 3 ministry aurors, 2 advocates from the ICW, and Bartemius Crouch Jr.'s testimony read into the record by a legal clerk because Crouch himself was in no condition to attend. He'd been committed to secure magical care in February. The Azkaban years and the months of polyjuice use having accumulated into something that the healers described carefully and precisely and with evident distress. Peter Pettigrew had been found in the 3rd week of March. He hadn't been found in Little Hangleton. Pettigrew, apparently, had understood that Little Hangleton was compromised after the second task sweep and had reverted to his rat form and run, and he'd been living in the walls of the Leaky Cauldron for 2 weeks before Tom the barman noticed his bar's rat population had developed an unusual interest in the Daily Prophet and set an enchanted trap. The arrest had been procedurally clean. The testimony had been harder. Pettigrew was small and frightened and genuinely sorry in the specific way of someone who had spent 12 years making choices he couldn't undo and was facing the full weight of them. His testimony confirmed everything. Peter Pettigrew, the actual secret keeper. Peter Pettigrew, who had given the Potter's location to Voldemort. Peter Pettigrew, who had framed Sirius Black in the street and faked his own death and lived as a rat for 12 years because the alternative was confessing. The Wisingamot voted 23-6 for full exoneration. Sirius walked out of the hearing with Harry on one side and Hermione on the other and Fleur slightly behind them, and he stood on the steps of the Ministry of Magic in the May sunshine and breathed like a man who had been underwater for 12 years and had finally come up. Well, he said, after a moment. Well, Harry agreed. Sirius turned and looked at him. He had cut his hair and acquired what Harry privately thought was a slightly over-enthusiastic new robe for the occasion, and his eyes were clear in a way they hadn't been even during the Hogsmeade visits, a deep, specific clarity that was not happiness exactly but was the precondition for it. He said, I want to buy a house. Harry said, good. Buy a big one. The 3rd task was exactly what it had been stripped down to be, a genuine challenge. The maze on the Hogwarts grounds on June 24 was legitimate, fully swept, verified clean by 3 rounds of detection charms, and it was still deeply difficult. Harry entered it at the same time as the other champions and found the first obstacle inside the first 3 minutes, a blast-ended scrut that had apparently been specifically fed and agitated for the occasion, enormous and belligerent and moving with the specific energy of something that had decided its personal crisis was everyone's problem. He went over it. Not around, not through, he leveraged a wandless levitation that was by now as natural as walking and took himself 8 feet off the ground and moved over the script before it could reorient, landed, kept going. The maze was designed to disorient. The hedges were high enough to block landmarks and the paths shifted at intervals, which he'd been warned about and had prepared for by developing an internal compass through 6 weeks of the specific magical awareness training that had started as feeling the school's geography and had evolved into something more comprehensive. He could feel the edges of the maze. He could feel the center. He moved toward the center with the directness of someone reading a map rather than navigating blind. A sphinx in the 3rd section. He'd been warned about these too. Hermione had drilled him on riddling tradition for 3 evenings. The Sphinx's riddle was genuinely clever, a layered construction about something that could be everything or nothing depending on who held it, and he spent 4 minutes on it, which was not fast but was not slow, and gave the answer, potential, and the Sphinx moved aside with the particular satisfaction of someone whose work had been properly engaged with. He found Cedric at the center first. Cedric was there before him by perhaps 3 minutes, standing in front of the Triwizard Cup with the focused, slightly exhausted expression of someone who had made it through a genuine obstacle course and was catching their breath before deciding. They looked at each other. Potter, Cedric said. Diggory, Harry said. You're faster than I thought you'd be, Cedric said. The maze suits my style, Harry said. He looked at the cup. It was just a cup. A real one, not a portkey. Beaumont had verified the actual tournament cup in 3 separate sweeps, and what it contained was simply the tournament's magic, the winning enchantment, the thing that ended the competition and crowned the champion. He looked back at Cedric. Take it. Cedric blinked. What? You were here first, Harry said. Take it. You earned it. Harry, I mean it, Harry said. He wasn't being noble. He wasn't performing generosity. He was being accurate. Cedric had competed fairly, had trained hard, had navigated the tournament without the benefit of 6 weeks of magical awakening and a Veela cursebreaker and the French ministry as a support structure. He'd competed clean. Take it. Cedric looked at him for a long moment, reading his face with the specific attention of someone determining if sincerity was genuine or performed. He found what he was looking for, apparently. We were tied on points before tonight, he said. We split it, then, Harry said. 2 hands on the cup. The tournament charter allows joint winners. Cedric looked at the cup. Then back at Harry. Does it? Hermione says it does, Harry said. She's usually right. Cedric laughed, a genuine, surprised sound. He crossed to the cup and put his right hand on one side of the handle. Harry put his left hand on the other. The tournament magic flared gold and warm and then released, and the maze fell away, and the crowd noise came back in a wall. They were joint champions. The Hogwarts crowd went in several directions simultaneously. The noise was enormous and confused and joyful in the way that crowds became joyful when something surprising had happened and the surprise turned out to be good. Fleur was on her feet in the stands. He knew this without looking, the echo bond telling him she was upright and vibrating with something that was the Veela equivalent of shouting. Gabrielle, beside her, was actually shouting. Dumbledore stood on the platform with the other judges and gave the announcement in his carrying voice, and for a moment his magic was warm in the way it used to be, the genuine part of it, the actual warmth that had always coexisted with the manipulation, and Harry heard it for what it was, real, and flawed, and not enough, but real. He let it be real. The celebration lasted until midnight and Harry extracted himself from it at 10:30, which was not antisocial but was survival. He had been congratulated by everyone he knew and several people he didn't. Hagrid had lifted him off the ground twice. Ron had appeared somewhere around 9 o'clock with the expression of someone who had spent 4 months processing a great deal and had arrived at something approaching understanding, and they had talked for 20 minutes in the quiet corridor. Off the great hall, just the 2 of them. Ron said, I should have, when you needed someone to just believe you. I should have done it faster. Harry looked at him. The old Harry, the filtered one, would have said it's fine and meant it because the forgiveness bond would have smoothed the edges. The actual Harry thought about it honestly and said, yes. You should have. And you figured it out eventually, so. He paused. You're my friend, Ron. That's real. The rest we work on. Ron nodded, and it was the nod of someone accepting something true rather than being absolved of something uncomfortable, and it was better. He found Fleur on the east lawn. She was there without planning, in the dark that was warm now instead of cold, and she had her shoes off and her Beauxbatons uniform exchanged for something less formal, and she was standing at the lake's edge with her toes in the grass and her arms crossed and looking at the water. He came up beside her. Joint champion, she said. Half a champion, he said. Cedric Diggory is not half a champion, she said. Neither are you. You both earned it. She paused. It was the right decision. I know, he said. The lake was still. June warm, the dark water holding the reflection of a sky with actual stars in it for the first time since December. I'm going home in 2 weeks, Fleur said. He had known this. He'd been knowing this for a while, in the background, without directly examining it. I know. My mother wants me back. Gabrielle's school year ends. And I have, obligations at the ministry in Paris, an internship with the French magical exchange program that starts in July. She paused. I am not disappearing. I know, he said again. The echo bond doesn't require proximity, she said. My grandmother has documented cases where it functioned over thousands of kilometers. A pause that had something careful in it. It does require maintenance. Intentional contact at intervals. Or it fades. I know that too, he said. He looked at her sideways. Solange's letters were very thorough. She is thorough about things that matter to her, Fleur said. How do you feel about going home, he asked. She thought about this with the same honesty he'd come to associate with her. Ready, she said. And not ready. Beau's batons was, I knew what it was there. What it asked of me. Here was different. She looked at the lake. Here was unexpected. Unexpected is one word, he said. She looked at him. In the starlight her face was exactly her face, not the performed version, not the social armoring, just Fleur, and he had learned over 6 months to distinguish between them so completely that the social version seemed almost like a different person. This was the real one. This was the person who had looked at him across a crowded ball with Veela eyes and done something ancient and irreversible because the alternative was unconscionable. I want to ask you something, he said. Ask it. The night of the ball, he said. You said the protective rupture happened before you decided. Before you chose it. That it was instinctive. He paused. Is any of this, after the instinct, is any of this chosen? Or is it all just the bond? She was quiet for a moment. That is the right question, she said. And I've been thinking about it since January. She looked at the water. The bond is real. The echo, the resonance, the way I know when you're well or troubled or working, that's real and it's not entirely chosen. It was created by the rupture and I didn't choose it. She paused. But what I think of you. How I feel when you're honest or when you're funny or when you do something that surprises me. Whether I want to be beside you when things are happening. She looked back at him. That is chosen. That is mine. Another pause. You should know that. He held her gaze in the dark. I want to write to you, he said. When you're in Paris. Not through the bond, actual letters. Actual letters, she said. Yes. She looked at him for another moment with something that was warm and real and unperformed. Then write, she said. Voldemort moved in July. Not with the tournament. Not with a plan built over years by a polyjuiced operative in a school. He moved the way a cornered thing moved, direct and desperate and stripped of elegance. On the 2nd of July, with Peter Pettigrew in custody and Barty Crouch Jr. in secure care and every primary operative either caught or burned, Voldemort himself crossed from Little Hangleton to a street in Muggle London in a body that was still more construct than real and tried to do the simplest version of the only thing he'd ever wanted. He tried to find Harry Potter. He found, instead, Sirius Black in the new house in Islington, a tall Georgian terrace with 4 floors and a garden that Sirius had spent 3 weeks making aggressively habitable, and Sirius was waiting, because Harry had told him to be ready, because Harry had told Sirius what Beaumont had told him about the backup for a backup, and Sirius had the specific capacity of someone who had spent 12 years in Azkaban learning to wait. Harry arrived 4 minutes after Sirius sent his Patronus. He arrived on foot, he'd been 2 streets away, because he'd been expecting this, because the backup for the backup's backup was always come for Harry at the place he's most likely to be, and Harry had been most likely to be at Sirius's house and had positioned himself 2 streets away with a 2-way mirror and the specific readiness of someone who had been preparing for an endgame for 4 months. He came in through the front door and found Sirius and Voldemort in the entryway. This was not, in any way, what Voldemort had expected. He had expected the managed, suppressed, appropriately terrified version that the plan had been built around. He had expected a boy who would freeze in the specific way that the fear enhancer had been designed to produce, that visceral, non-rational terror that bypassed judgment and left a person reacting instead of thinking. What he found was Harry Potter without any of that. The entryway of Sirius's house was narrow and lit by 2 sconces and smelled of new paint and old wood and the residual magic of a house that had been thoroughly re-enchanted by its enthusiastic new owner, and in it Voldemort was facing Sirius with his wand raised and his red eyes narrow and his constructed body moving with the specific fluency of someone who had spent the last months exercising it back toward competence. He turned when Harry came in. And stopped. Harry had thought about this moment many times. He had thought about what it would feel like to look at Voldemort without the fear enhancer, without the 42 other bonds, without the installed ceiling on his magic. He had thought about whether the natural fear, the real one, the proportionate one, would be manageable. It was. Not absent. Present and real, and appropriate to the actual situation, which was 2 reasonably powerful wizards in an entryway facing something that had killed his parents and had been trying to kill him his entire life. The fear sat in his chest like information rather than a cage. He looked at Voldemort. Voldemort looked at him. "You're smaller than I expected," Harry said. He said this not to provoke but because it was simply accurate. The constructed body was functional but not imposing, was not the thing of childhood nightmares that the fear enhancer had maintained in him at maximum horror for years. It was a body occupied by a desperate and powerful intelligence that had made catastrophic errors of judgment for 30 years and was facing the consequences of them. Real, and dangerous, and human in the specific way that things that had chosen to make themselves inhuman retained the shape of it. Voldemort moved. He was fast. Genuinely fast, the speed of someone for whom magic had been a weapon and a tool and an extension of will for 60 years. The curse he threw was not the killing curse, was the Cruciatus, Harry realized, reading the signature in the instant it left the wand, and Harry moved sideways with the speed of someone who had been drilling reflexes for 6 months without a ceiling, and the curse hit the wall where he'd been and left a mark in the plaster. Sirius cast from his left. They worked in a way they'd never explicitly drilled but that emerged naturally from knowing each other, from the specific chemistry of 2 people who had prepared for the same thing from different angles. Sirius's magic was 12 years rusty and burning through the rust fast, and Harry's was 4 months mature and vast, and between them the narrow entryway was not a good place to be anything except very good. Voldemort was very good. He was also, for the first time in his operational career, facing Harry Potter fully unmanaged, which meant facing the actual thing rather than the shaped version. The version that had been pointed at this confrontation by a prophecy and a lifetime of difficulty and 6 months of deliberately developing every skill he'd been allowed to learn and a great number he hadn't been. The fight was short and brutal and nothing like a duel in the formal sense. No bowing, no taking turns, no space for monologues. Harry hit Voldemort with a wandless Expelliarmus that was strong enough to throw him back into the hallway wall, and Sirius followed it with a binding hex that was good enough to hold for approximately 2 seconds, which was enough for Harry to close the distance and follow with a stunning combination that was not 1 spell but 3 stacked in immediate sequence, targeted at the specific magical structure of the constructed body rather than the body itself. He'd been thinking about this since March, when Beaumont had sent him the texts about old magic she'd mentioned after the second task. What she'd sent was a survey of magical body construction, historical dark magic documentation from the 1600s, the kind of thing that existed in Cursebreaker archives because you needed to know how things were built to know how to take them apart. The constructed body was not a natural body. It held Voldemort's spirit through an active magical construct that required ongoing maintenance. Hit the construct rather than the person, and the maintenance failed. The third spell in the sequence was not in any standard curriculum. He'd found it in Beaumont's texts and worked out its mechanics over 2 months and never tested it on anything because there was nothing to test it on except the real thing. This was the real thing. It worked. Not elegantly. Not with any cinematic finality. The constructed body simply stopped maintaining itself. Voldemort's spirit, separated from its anchor, moved, and the house was very loud for 3 seconds and then very still. Sirius was standing by the doorway with his wand out and his chest heaving. Harry stood in the entryway with the specific physical sensation of someone who has just done something that took an enormous amount of magic all at once, the way you felt after a sustained sprint, the deep muscle fatigue of effort. The hallway was destroyed. The plaster was scored, 2 sconces were gone, the paint had blistered in several places, and the floorboards at the far end had given up trying to be intact. "I just painted that wall," Sirius said. "Sorry," Harry said. Sirius turned and looked at him. His face was doing several things simultaneously that were too complicated to name individually. He crossed the entryway and put both hands on Harry's shoulders and looked at him, and what was in his face was the specific emotion of a person who has been afraid for a very long time and is on the other side of it. Harry said, "Are you all right?" Sirius said, "Are you?" "Yes," Harry said. "Yes," Sirius said. They stood in the destroyed entryway for a moment, surrounded by plaster dust and the smell of spent magic, and then Sirius pulled him in and held on, and Harry let him. The aftermath of Voldemort's final defeat was, like all aftermaths, considerably less tidy than the event that produced it. There was the Ministry investigation. There was the question of Voldemort's nature and whether the spirit that had been separated from its constructed body had truly been eliminated or merely displaced, which the Unspeakables debated for 2 weeks and Beaumont resolved in 3 days by methods she declined to fully disclose but which she described as comprehensive. There was the question of the remaining Death Eaters, who were in various states of denial, flight, and sudden enthusiastic reassessment of their choices. There were the Wisingamot proceedings, the international coverage, the Daily Prophet, which managed for once to be more accurate than not primarily because Rita Skeeter was on the right side of the story and she was, whatever her other qualities, extremely good at being on the right side of a story. Harry gave 2 statements and declined 4 interview requests and attended 1 formal ministry ceremony at which Fudge shook his hand with the specific energy of a man attaching himself to an outcome he had not contributed to, and Harry shook the hand and said nothing uncharitable because the ceremony was for other people, for the families of people who hadn't been as lucky, for the ones who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and needed a moment to set it down. He sat at the ceremony between Sirius and Hermione and felt the echo bond run steady from 400 miles north, where Fleur was in Paris attending her ministry internship, and had been since the first week of July. She had felt the fight happen. She had told him so afterward, in a letter that arrived the day after. The letter was 3 sentences long and the first sentence was "I know you're all right because I know," and the second was "write to me when you can," and the third was "I am extremely annoyed at not being there." He had written back immediately. The letters were, as the summer went on, a specific kind of communication that had no good category. Not the letters of strangers getting to know each other. Not the letters of people already fully known to each other. Something between, the letters of 2 people who knew each other in one context and were learning the shape of each other in another. She wrote about the Paris internship, about the ministry's actual workings, which were somewhat less glamorous than advertised, about her supervisor who was excellent, about a case she wasn't supposed to tell him about but told him anyway because he was not going to run to the French ministry press office about it. He wrote about the summer, about Sirius's house, which was being rebuilt in the literal sense of its entryway and the figurative sense of what it was for, about training, about the specific strange texture of a summer without a cloud of dread over it. He told her about a Tuesday afternoon in August when he'd been sitting in Sirius's garden and realized, with the clarity of something fully arrived rather than gradually approached, that he was happy. Not performing happiness, not experiencing the installed warmth of a bond-managed contentment. Actually happy, in the clear and unambiguous way of someone whose life was genuinely good and who knew it. She had written back, "I know. I felt it from here." Hogwarts in September was different from every previous September. He walked through the doors on the first and felt the school's magic, familiar and enormous and his own, in the sense that it knew him and he knew it, and what he didn't feel was the managed quality of every previous year. No gentle hands on his choices. No warm suggestions steering him away from certain questions. Just the school, old and complicated and full of people he was about to spend another year among. Dumbledore was still there. They passed each other in the entrance hall on the first evening, and Dumbledore paused, and Harry paused, and they looked at each other. Dumbledore said, 5th year, Harry. Yes, Harry said. You have a great deal to learn still, Dumbledore said. There is more ahead of you. There's always more ahead, Harry said. That's the thing about a life. He paused. I'll handle it. Dumbledore smiled. Not the managed warm version. Something smaller, more honest, with a weight in it. I believe you will, he said. Harry went up to the Gryffindor common room and sat in his usual chair by the fire and felt his magic running easy and vast and entirely his own, and thought about the year ahead with the specific quality of someone who had no idea what was coming and found the not knowing interesting rather than frightening. Hermione arrived with 4 books and a list of 5th-year preparation notes. Ron arrived with a Chudley Cannon's pin and the news that they'd had a reasonable preseason. Neville arrived looking marginally less anxious than every previous September, which was progress. Ginny arrived with a raised eyebrow that communicated an entire paragraph of sibling awareness about what her brother had and hadn't processed over the summer. The common room filled up. The fire was warm. The castle settled into the comfortable noise of an institution resuming its purpose. Harry's first letter to Fleur arrived 3 hours into the term. She timed it, he was almost certain, carried by Marguerite the Owl, who deposited it with the air of someone completing a professional obligation and immediately began eyeing the plate of biscuits on the side table. The letter was not long. Most of her letters weren't long, she wrote with the economy of someone who had been taught that precision was worth more than volume. First day back. Tell me everything is ridiculous and infuriating in the best possible way. I am in my 4th week of Cursebreaker theory and my supervisor has given me an actual case file, which I am not allowed to discuss but which I will discuss extensively the next time I see you. Gabrielle sends her regards and says she hopes you're wearing a hat because the Scottish Highlands in September are not a joke. I concur. The echo bond this morning was, I don't have the English word. The French word is serein. Look it up. Right back. Fleur he looked up serein. It meant the specific quality of a clear sky after rain, the particular piece of something that had been difficult becoming still. He wrote back that evening, in his slightly rough French that was getting less rough, and the letter went on for 2 pages because he had a great deal to tell her and it turned out the telling of it was one of the better parts of the day. The summer's events settled into history the way all events settled, gradually, and not completely, because the things that had been done and broken and rebuilt did not vanish into the past but became part of the texture of the present. The formal proceedings against Dumbledore completed in October with a finding that was comprehensive and public and that did exactly what Rousseau had intended, it put a permanent, unambiguous record into the international register that could not be retracted or managed. Dumbledore submitted a written statement to accompany the finding. Harry read it. It was, in Hermione's assessment, the most honest document the man had ever produced, which was a low bar and also somehow still moving, because it was the statement of someone looking at a lifetime of choices with clear eyes and accepting what they saw. The Sirius Black exoneration completed in November with the formal award of compensation from the British Ministry that Sirius donated immediately to the families of Azkaban wrongful imprisonment cases, because he had no interest in the Ministry's money and considerable interest in making the point about what 12 years without trial did to people. The Delacour family visited London in November. Not as part of any official proceeding. Apollon Delacour brought Fleur and Gabrielle to London on the 2nd weekend of November, and they stayed with Sirius, whose house was by then fully habitable and considerably livelier than its previous incarnation, and Harry spent 2 days in the specific warmth of everyone he most valued being in the same place. Apollon Delacour was exactly what he'd expected from her letters, which was someone who had produced Fleur and clearly understood precisely what she had produced. She assessed Harry with warm and entirely undisguised evaluation over dinner on the first night, asked him 3 pointed questions about his plans for his education and his understanding of French magical law, and then appeared satisfied in the specific way of someone who has confirmed something they already suspected. Sirius, over the washing up, said, "She's terrifying." "She's wonderful," Harry said. "Yes," Sirius said. "Both." Fleur and Harry went for a walk after dinner, just the 2 of them, in the November cold of the Islington streets, and it was not the lake and it was not the east lawn and it was not the cold of a Scottish winter, but it was fine, it was better than fine. You look different, she said. From July. Better? More settled, she said. July you'd just done something enormous and your magic was still processing it. September you were starting something. November you are, she paused, finding the word. Saran. You used it, he said. It fits, she said. He looked at her in the London streetlight, in her non-Bosbaden's clothes, in the specific ease of someone on a night that belonged to her and no one else, and he thought about the Yule Ball and the cold corridor and 9 o'clock in the library and the East Lawn in the dark and the lake in February and everything since. He thought about 44 empty spaces that were no longer empty, filled, now, with things that were actually his. Actual anger and actual warmth and actual ambition and actual friendship and actual fear in appropriate amounts and actual love in whatever shape it was taking, which he was not yet entirely sure about but which was unmistakably real. I want to ask you something, he said. She looked at him. Ask it. When you go back to Paris in December, he said. And I'm in Scotland. And the letters are, he stopped, found the directness that was his natural mode. I want there to be more than letters, eventually. I don't know what the shape of it is yet. I know the timeline is complicated and I know we're both doing things that matter and I'm not asking you to, I'm not asking for anything specific. I'm just asking if, yes, she said. I haven't finished. You finished, she said. The answer is yes. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the expression that was her actual face, the real one, and said, You are the person who read my grandmother's letters in French and trained in the dark in January and kept a promise about my 8-year-old sister and asked me how I felt after the rupture before you asked me anything else. She paused. Yes, Harry. The answer to whatever the question was going to be is yes. He said, That's quite a speech. I've been composing it since March, she said. He laughed, the short unself-conscious one, and she smiled the actual smile, and the echo bond ran between them warm and continuous in the London night. He was 15 in July and the summer was warm. He woke up on his birthday in Sirius's house with the specific sensation of a day that was going to be good, no dramatic reason, no large event, just the accumulated weight of a year and a summer tipping into something that felt like the right direction. Downstairs, Sirius had made breakfast, which was optimistic because Sirius's cooking was ambitious and inconsistent, but the intent was right. Hermione arrived at 10 with books, because Hermione's love language was books, and Ron arrived at noon with the twins behind him, all three of them in the specific state of people who had planned something that was either very good or moderately catastrophic. It was very good. Fred and George had developed a charm that made birthday cakes explode harmlessly into confetti and they had applied it with some enthusiasm and the kitchen had a festive but slightly dangerous look by 1 in the afternoon. Fleur's letter arrived at 2. It was longer than usual. 3 pages, in French that he no longer needed to work hard to read, about the case she'd been on, fully closed now in public, so she could discuss it, about a conversation with her grandmother who had sent a separate note at the bottom of Fleur's letter in Solange's spidery hand that said you are precisely what I thought you were, which is to say, good, Solange. About Paris in summer. About plans she was making for August, which she phrased with deliberate vagueness and a specific playfulness that meant she was managing a surprise. At the bottom of the 3 pages, below her signature and below Solange's addition and below the address of the Paris internship office, she had written one more line. The world is large and very interesting and you have your whole life ahead of you without anyone's hands on the wheel except your own. Happy birthday, Harry. He read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in his pocket and went back to the birthday chaos of Sirius's kitchen, where the twins were attempting to defend the application of a second confetti charm on the grounds of precedent and Sirius was objecting loudly and Hermione was pretending to read while watching everything and Ron was eating cake with the focused dedication of someone who had been thinking about that specific cake since he arrived. Harry leaned against the kitchen doorframe and looked at the room. The room was warm and loud and real. He thought about the Yule Ball. About a great hall full of light and music and a boy sitting at a table feeling slightly off-center in his own life, 44 hands steering him somewhere someone else had decided he should be. He thought about what Fleur had written. Your whole life ahead of you without anyone's hands on the wheel except your own. He thought, yes. He pushed off the doorframe and walked into the room.